I became a planet. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1 Rebirth. Nothingness, dead silence, and no life. When Guo Sen was reborn as a satellite orbiting the terrifying green gas planet opposite, he was excited for a while. But after circling the mother planet for nearly 100 times and carefully examining his sphere, he finally realized that he was a dead planet. There was no life, no ocean, and even no atmosphere. There were only countless large and small densely packed meteorite impact craters, as well as continuous peaks and deep canyons like ugly scars. He was a barren planet. Guo Sen, who was originally an ordinary human, thought he was dead after a serious traffic accident one day. After being inexplicably reborn on this planet, he found that this boring life was no different from being dead. Surrounded by the endless dark void of the universe, he didn't know where he was. Tidally locked, he could only face the gas planet in front of him that looked like Saturn, and was pulled by gravity to do boring and endless revolutions and rotations. Guo Sen has a 720-degree supervision system. He had carefully observed the green gas planet opposite. Guo Sen couldn't think of any words to describe it except huge. He was also glad that he didn't have giant phobia. Guo Sen also found that in addition to himself, there were 50 or 60 unlucky people orbiting around the gas planet like him, and there was also a brown planet not far away from him. Between these satellites and gas planets, there were countless strange things flashing. He turned around twice and observed carefully before he found that it should be a star ring composed of trillions of various ice and dust, like the kind of thing that Saturn has, and he was just outside the outermost layer of the star ring. Of course, Guo Sen could also see the strangely burning red star in the distance behind him. This star also made Guo Sen understand that he was not in the solar system, and the one in front of him was not Saturn, and the Earth did not exist. In this place, he was sometimes freezing cold, and sometimes he felt scorched. Ice and fire. This life is really tormenting. Guo Sen had carefully examined his own composition. He had the same core and stratum structure as the common rocky planet he knew, but the surface was covered with hard rocks, and the volcanic activity was too mild, with almost no signs of eruption. It felt like the moon. Guo Sen had heard of such things as silicon-based creatures, and he had imagined that he also had these little things on his body, but no matter how he looked, it was just rocks, rocks, rocks. There was no sign of life. Oh, what should I do next? Will it go on like this forever? If there was life, at least Guo Sen could have some fun, instead of circling around the green planet like a fool like now. He turned around 10 more times. He suddenly remembered that he had read on the internet that scientists speculated that life on Earth might have been born from the impact of an asteroid containing ice. If an asteroid hit him, Guo Sen deployed the all-weather 360-degree visual system and carefully searched for the only hope. He was lucky. After turning around dozens of times, Guo Sen actually discovered 2 asteroids that were very close to him at the same time. By comparing the ice blocks that formed the planetary rings a little further away, Guo Sen roughly estimated their size. Well, it's about 1% of mine. It's a little big, but it's better than nothing, right? However, Guo Sen obviously forgot something. He looked at the 2 huge rocks passing by not far from him with hope, and then found in despair that they went straight to the big guy he was facing. The 2 asteroids suddenly split into dozens of pieces very close to the gas planet, and then hit it at an unimaginable speed. Guo Sen watched the green surface of the gas planet with a strong storm on its surface, and then a red light appeared. The range of the explosion was even larger than him times 10. He circled the gas planet for another half circle, and the dazzling red spots were still deadly. Wow. If this hit me, it would be. But this looks like the Suli 9 hitting Jupiter. The loss just now has now turned into luck. Guo Sen feels that, if he can sweat, he will definitely sweat out a Pacific Ocean. He also understood that, even if there were any more asteroids passing by, they would definitely be captured by the huge gravity of the gas planet, and it would never be his turn. If it weren't for the strong gravity of the big guy opposite, his little planet GUOSEN might have become an independent planet, right? Well, this bastard is really in the way. Alas, how can I make the meteorite hit me? Thinking like this, GUOSEN circled the gas planet again and again. He obviously forgot something again. Not too long after, several meteorites attracted by the gravity of the gas planet easily broke through all obstacles when GUOSEN was feeling bored and directly hit the surface of his sphere. The meteorite raised enough rocks and dust to cover the sky, and in the continuous and violent vibration, it successfully left several huge circular craters on his surface. Those craters are just like other craters on his body. GUOSEN understood his position. He is also one of the many targets in space. Being bombarded by meteorites is basically a common occurrence. GUOSEN checked the news car and unexpectedly found that he was quite lucky. He found that the meteorites were really the ones with ice, as said in the legend. New life. New life. GUOSEN was delighted to see the light and temperature of the stars gradually melt the ice and felt that his core was about to jump. New life might be born on his planet. However, under the shining of the stars, the water continued to evaporate, gradually became smaller, and finally scattered in the void of the universe. What? GUOSEN did not expect that the spark of life would be scattered just like that. What went wrong? GUOSEN thought for a long time and finally understood. The atmosphere. It's the atmosphere. Without it, the water would definitely not be retained. He figured it out and began to worry. How do you make this atmosphere? GUOSEN began to desperately recall the knowledge taught by his geography teacher in high school. Wait, let me think about it. It seems that it is said that the Earth's crust was extremely active in the early days of the Earth's birth, and a large number of volcanoes erupted collectively. The volatilized gases were the early atmosphere. GUOSEN's memory was relatively good, and he finally remembered these. Alas, but how can I make my crust active? Difficulties came again. This problem also made GUOSEN understand that it is not so easy to give birth to life. He has become a cold rocky planet, and his crust is no longer as easy to move violently as when he was just born. While he was distressed, he circled the mother planet several times. Alas, what should I do? Can I make a volcano erupt just by thinking about it? Just as he was thinking this, he suddenly felt that his sphere began to vibrate violently. Then, cracks appeared in several places, and a large amount of magma gushed out violently from there. GUOSEN was confused. What's going on? I said it would erupt, and it really erupted. The violently erupting volcano seemed to have no intention of stopping, and a large amount of dust and gas were lifted into the sky. No way. Coincidence? If I say erupt all over me, can it erupt globally? Just then, a bigger tremor began. Countless cracks were squeezed out of the sphere, and more violent eruptions began. The large amount of white, gray, or black gas from the volcanic eruption gradually gathered together, forming a small piece, a large piece. In the end, the gas from all over the world gathered together, and with the continuous volcanic eruption, it continued to thicken. GUOSEN. Oh my god, this is serious. Chapter 2 New life is coming. GUOSEN tried to stop an erupting volcano, and it really stopped. He found himself, it seems to be a magical power that can control everything. GUOSEN didn't know why he had this power. After all, being reborn as a planet is strange enough, and GUOSEN was not so shocked to have such a power. What he cares about now is what is happening now. That is, he is about to enter the era of having a primitive atmosphere. Thousands of volcanoes around the world are still erupting violently, with no signs of stopping, erupting violent magma, which greatly increases the surface area of GUOSEN's sphere, making him a little bigger than before. The clouds formed by the large amount of gas erupted began to accumulate thicker and thicker, rising higher and higher, and finally floating in the sky, slowly turning from gray to darker. However, GUOSEN felt that this was far from enough. How thick is the Earth's atmosphere? This is more. Keep erupting, my volcanoes. GUOSEN was excited. He hoped that he could quickly have an atmosphere that can lay the foundation for life. More volcanic vents emerged from the surface, and magma continued to erupt, as if it was free. Guo Sen didn't feel any pain, he just felt like a ripe lychee, with many bumps and a deep red color. He circled around the mother planet again and again. The volcano continued to erupt. Guo Sen enjoyed this process. During this period, the violent phenomena on his surface continued, and those black clouds collided and rubbed against each other, and even flashed countless terrifying lightning on the surface. Is that enough? After a long time, Guo Sen saw that the clouds had escaped gravity and even began to escape into outer space, and he thought it seemed to be enough. He could also see that the accumulated clouds were now frighteningly black. What should I do next? Let me think. Just as he began to reduce the volcanic activity, the black clouds covering the fiery red surface began to rain heavily, accompanied by constant violent thunder. Guo Sen had never seen such a heavy rain, and every drop seemed to be able to drill through the ground. The rainstorm seemed to never stop. It continued even after Guo Sen had circled the mother star for more than 100 times. However, he did not want the rain to stop. Guo Sen observed carefully. The never-ending rain poured thick white steam from the red magma erupting from the surface, and the steam rose to the sky to become new rain clouds. As time went by, the temperature of the magma became lower and lower, gradually forming a layer of black hard shell. At the same time, just like joining in the fun, a group of meteorites suddenly came from the outer space. They turned into meteorite rain and began to bombard the surface again. These bombardments caused more sunken giant pits to appear on the surface of Guo Sen, and in some places, they were even thousands of meters deep. The continuous rain fell on the surface and gradually merged into streams. Then, the streams merged into wider rivers. The rushing rivers merged into those giant pits, and at the same time, they were also washing the hard surface shell. The originally hard shell was slowly eroded and became deep canyons, and the floods composed of rain also made these canyons wider and wider. The giant pit was slowly filled up, and finally it broke out of control, and more water flowed into deeper places. Guo Sen observed for a long time, and finally understood that this was the process of ocean formation. It took quite a long time. The heavy rain continued for many years, and Guo Sen watched the color of the clouds gradually change to light gray. Looking at the giant pits, some of them were not filled yet. He decided to restart volcanic activity. After all, the current amount of water could not create a wide and deep ocean for him. Guo Sen also started more actions at the same time. Tearing the giant pit that was smashed out, making it wider and deeper, and then raising part of the surface. This also made the surface of the earth into two extremes, half of which was a deep pit that constantly flowed into rainwater, and the other half was a relatively high highland on the surface. This is the ocean and land. Guo Sen looked at it and felt that this was not over yet. He decided to imitate the appearance of the earth, tearing all the surface, creating several plates, and using the movement of the plates to form a few thousand meters of abyss and continuous peaks. The intensified movement at the junction of the plates has caused the peaks to develop rapidly, forming several plateaus around the world. Those in the abyss of the sea have become bottomless trenches. The entire land that was originally towering has now been torn into several pieces by this plate. The distribution of land and ocean is probably complete. Guo Sen controlled the volcanoes on land and ocean to erupt violently again, making the precipitation more terrifying, and also gradually filling up those deep pits, forming several vast oceans, and the craters in the ocean formed countless small islands. After an unknown number of years, the rain clouds gradually dissipated and finally stopped. The original black color of the rain clouds gradually turned into light gray and became translucent. The thick layer of air formed was Guo Sen's original atmosphere. Guo Sen looked at the land, ocean, and atmosphere with satisfaction, and could feel a great sense of accomplishment. All of these were formed in a short period of time under his power. He found that even in this process, the temperature on the surface of the sphere was slowly decreasing, from nearly 1000 degrees before, to below 100 degrees after the ocean was formed. The foundation has been built, and what remains is to start preparing for the creation of life. Why do I suddenly feel like a creator? Muhaha. Guo Sen was a little proud. However, he has not completely stopped volcanic activity, and there are still thousands of craters around the world. The atmosphere has not yet been fully formed. He thinks that he must first establish this cycle and wait until the right time, and then let the volcanoes gradually subside. As time goes by, the temperature of the entire sphere has gradually stabilized during this period of time, coupled with some actions of Guo Sen. Under the effect of the primitive atmosphere, even when the red star is directly facing him, the temperature can be controlled at around 70 degrees, and at night, everything will not be frozen like before. This is all the credit of the atmosphere. However, at the locations of the North and South poles, some huge ice blocks have gradually accumulated over time. He knows that now the conditions for the birth of life are initially met. Guo Sen is now looking forward to the dirty snowball again. The so-called dirty snowball is a small celestial body with a large amount of ice and snow mixed materials, just like the meteorite that hit him at the beginning a long time ago. In theory, some very simple single-cell spores should be born on them. When the dirty snowball will arrive is not something Guo Sen can control. Good luck may not always come, but it will not completely disappear. Guo Sen is lucky. Just after he circled the mother planet for dozens of times again, he found a standard dirty snowball, heading straight for him. It was a meteorite with a diameter of about 50 meters. After passing through the thick atmosphere, it was not completely burned up, but hit a place at the junction of land and ocean. Guo Sen hurriedly began to observe. After the dirty snowball hit the continental shelf, it set off a small earthquake, but then it returned to calm. He hoped that there would really be some spores inside that could gradually give birth to life. Guo Sen held expectations and circled around the mother planet again and again. His visual system, like a high-power microscope, can see extremely small things. He would run over there from time to carefully look for clues, but after a long time, there seemed to be no changes. Time passed slowly. One day, Guo Sen finally observed something completely different from before in the warmer nearshore ocean. There were countless creatures with single-cell nuclei that were not even micrometers in size. Some were just a sphere with a single cell, and some were like cylinders, constantly scurrying around in the water. Oh, this is fun. Guo Sen was completely excited. Those tiny lives were like tiny bugs. At this moment, they were wandering in the water, eating even smaller ones, or splitting from one cell into two cells in front of Guo Sen's eyes. Guo Sen also discovered that there were extremely tiny light green translucent single-celled creatures in the ocean. They gathered together to form a group of small green dots, floating motionlessly in the shallow water, like extremely tiny seaweed. The single-celled organisms that were active before were feeding on them. It seems different from what I imagined. Guo Sen felt that these little things were like sheep eating grass. The evolution of single-celled organisms did not seem to be as fast as imagined. Guo Sen circled the mother planet again and again, and felt that those little things did not seem to have changed much. Not only did evolution not happen, but even the distribution area was only the place where the meteorite hit. Both development and evolution are a bit too slow. Do you want my help? After thinking about it, he decided to intervene in these little lives. Otherwise, I don't know when it will happen. Guo Sen used his ability to transport dozens of water droplets containing countless lives to the vicinity of the sea with a similar environment. This is also the safest way. If something happens to the creatures in that place and they are all wiped out, at least there are some backups. Guo Sen repeated this many times. He didn't want to be like this. He really didn't expect that his size was not small, and even the ocean was so big that it had no boundaries. I'm not bigger than the earth, am I? Emma, I'm so tired. After making thousands of backups, Guo Sen sighed and fell into a dormant state like a deep sleep. Chapter 3 The Most Special One. Guo Sen thought that he had not been in hibernation for too long. But when he woke up and looked at those small lives, he found that those simple single-celled organisms had suddenly changed a lot. They were originally simple in shape and features, but now they are all strange and bizarre. Almost every one of them has grown dramatically in size. If they were less than 1 micron in the past, they are now basically tens of microns in size. The almost transparent body color in the past has now been replaced by colorful colors, making each one look different. As for the tiny algae-like plants seen before, They have become larger now, even reaching nearly 1 millimeter, and the number is extremely large, almost covering a large part of the sea surface near the coast. Guo Sen observed carefully and found that those active single-celled small organisms seem to be divided into two camps. One side is the algae-eating ones seen before, accounting for the vast majority of the number, and the color is almost mainly green. Each one swims very fast, and almost all of them are marked by group activities, and the characteristic is that they have long whisker on their heads. They almost all move in groups, and there are very few lone rangers. As for the other side, Guo Sen felt that each of them looked very strange. There were spherical things with thorns all over their bodies, like hedgehogs. There were also guys with fangs that took up 2/3 of their bodies. There were also those little monsters that were red all over and wielded something like pliers. The number of these guys was very small, but each of them was not a good person. Their favorite thing seemed to be chasing those little guys who ate seaweed, then piercing them and absorbing them, turning them into new nutrients. Of course, they seemed to be killing each other, even those who looked the same. Guo Sen felt that this was also the reason why their number was so small. He looked at the little guys in these two camps and instantly remembered the relationship between wolves and rabbits on Earth. On his sphere, it seemed that carnivorous single-celled organisms and herbivorous single-celled organisms were born. Maybe because of the more suitable temperature, Guo Sen felt that the nutrients in this light green sea water seemed to be quite rich. Oh, this is good. It seems a bit interesting, but their evolution seems a bit slow. After watching dozens of groups of them released before, they were all similar, with the only difference being their appearance. Guo Sen looked at them as an observer, and after watching for a long time, he felt a little bored. Single-celled organisms seem to have only the method of reproduction of continuous division, which is indeed very fast, but he watched for a long time and did not find any changes in these guys. Well, if I can control these little guys, maybe I can make them change differently? Thinking of this, Guo Sen suddenly found that a small creature eating seaweed very close to him suddenly stopped eating, and the whiskers that were shaking wildly even stopped moving instantly. Dead. Guo Sen was puzzled. It was fine just now. At this moment, a guy with a pincer-shaped mouthpiece that was relatively close to him instantly used his mouthpiece to cut its body into two, and then completely absorbed it into his body. Haha, isn't it because I'm controlling it that it's not moving? Do I still have the ability to control living things? Impossible. Guo Sen thought so, and with a joking attitude, he wanted to control this guy with a pincer mouthpiece. Unexpectedly, it also stopped all its activities instantly. This time it was Guo Sen's turn to be confused. No way, really? Not only can he control everything in his sphere, but he can even control living things? His confusion turned into ecstasy in an instant. Guo Sen, who found that he had another ability, saw that the little guy who originally ate meat actually ate seaweed according to his wishes. A third-person game. It's fun. He became playful and began to control the little guy to rush around, turning the entire biological settlement upside down. In the end, he even found that he could control multiple creatures. At most, he could even control thousands of them at the same time. After playing for a while, Guo Sen fell into deep thought again. If you can control them and then accelerate the evolution process, is it a way? After all, this simple single-celled organism is really too low. At this rate, if it evolves to the point where intelligent creatures appear, it will take a long time. He vaguely remembered a piece of knowledge he had read online. That is, it seemed to have taken 3.5 billion years from the beginning of life to the appearance of humans. Guo Sen really couldn't wait for this huge number 3.5 billion years. How many times would it have to go around the mother planet? Guo Sen felt like dying just thinking about it. He was not a person who liked to wait. Guo Sen began to make a plan. Not only did he have to control the rapid evolution of these guys, but he also couldn't let any of them become too powerful. If the balance was broken, maybe he would lose everything and all the creatures would be doomed. First, what he had to do was to select the most special one among these single-celled organisms. Some of these special guys might have dominant genes, or they might have inferior genes, which required very fine screening. After screening, They would divide and reproduce in large numbers to expand the population, and then select the most special one again, and repeat the cycle again. Okay, let's plan this for now. If it fails, I have thousands of backups to continue the experiment. However, it would be best if it succeeds once. Thinking of this, Guo Sen began to use his ability to simply classify the carnivorous and herbivorous little guys. This way, they can be identified in detail to the greatest extent. First of all, on the carnivorous side, their number accounts for a relatively small proportion, and because of the fierce competition, it seems that their evolutionary directions are different. The color is mostly red, so Guo Sen calls them little red. Guo Sen quickly found some relatively unique individuals from them. On the herbivorous side, most of them are green and translucent, so he calls them little green. On the little green side, it is relatively more complicated and difficult. Their number is too huge, and their appearance is basically the same. It is really hard to find the difference. After spending some time, Guo Sen still selected some of them as test subjects. Next, what he has to do is to control these guys, bring a lot of algae, and migrate them collectively to another clean water area. The migration work went exceptionally smoothly. Guo Sen used his ability to turn the water area where they were located into a ball, which floated in the air and began to move. This also allowed these little guys to reach their destination smoothly without any sacrifice. Okay, then let's start the experiment. First, let these guys start eating. He also brought a lot of ordinary little greens as food for these little reds. Otherwise it would be bad to let them eat those special little greens. On the side of the little greens, Guo Sen certainly prepared a lot of seaweed. In this way, both sides don't have to worry about food. The experiment is a little cruel, but in order to make these little guys evolve as soon as possible, this is a sacrifice that must be made. The ordinary little greens were just put in the same area to eat seaweed, and Guo Sen controlled all the little reds to swim towards them frantically. The number of ordinary little greens is about 3,000, and all the little reds together are only 100. From the reproduction speed observed before, the little greens can split 5 times in just an hour or so, while the little reds can split once. This can also effectively control the number of both sides, so that there will be no imbalance and collapse. Okay, little reds, you guys start the evolution journey first. Chapter 4, Survival of the Fittest. Under Guo Sen's control, the weird-looking reds gradually approached the greens that were leisurely eating seaweed. Only by constantly taking in nutrients can these guys split and reproduce, produce more advantageous genes, and thus complete the great evolution. The only way for the reds to take in nutrients is to eat the greens. In previous observations, Guo Sen had also paid special attention to how the carnivorous reds hunt. They almost all rely on weapons such as spikes, large pincers or huge mouths to hunt. After successfully attacking the prey, they will stick their mouths like straws into the prey to absorb various substances inside. Excessive pursuit of attacks and slow speed due to large size are also their fatal shortcomings. Guo Sen has observed that generally a red will start to split and reproduce when it eats more than 4 greens. These stupid guys are often eaten by their own kind when splitting and reproducing, which makes the speed of evolution seem even slower. This is also the aspect that Guo Sen is eager to change for them. After all, the speed of evolution is the top priority. Compared to the little reds, the little greens not only swim faster, but also reproduce faster. Guo Sen has observed that the number of these little guys seems to be growing exponentially, which is also closely related to the over-luxuriant algae. The abundant food has allowed the population of the little greens to continue to expand. Even though they were preyed on by the little reds before, they have never been eaten up. Guo Sen began to act, and he controlled all the little reds to start hunting. That's it. The little reds were more flexible than before under his control. Like a pack of wolves, the little reds quickly swam close to a group of little greens that were still immersed in eating seaweed, and then they deployed their weapons and surrounded the little greens in an instant. Under Guo Sen's control, the shortcomings of their originally clumsy movements disappeared. Fast, steady, accurate, and ruthless. When the little reds preyed on a little green, Guo Sen released the control. After the little reds were stunned for a second, they killed and ate the little greens in their own way. The little greens that had managed to escape the clutches of the devil were now scattered, some even hiding in the seaweed, or lurking in further places. If it had been before, it would have been difficult for the little reds to catch and eat the little greens again when they encountered such a situation. After Guo Sen repeated it several times, he felt that this speed was still a bit slow. It was still a waste of time to control the little reds, to eat the little greens over and over again. Why not? Don't blame me, this is all for evolution. Guo Sen instantly controlled a bunch of little greens and sent them to the mouths of the little reds. There was no reason not to enjoy what was at their mouths. The little reds continued to receive the gifts sent by Guo Senator. After a while, the little reds suddenly dispersed to faraway locations without any prior agreement, and then they all began to split. The process of splitting was like someone cutting a knife in the middle of their bodies, stretching the two ends and shrinking the center like a peanut. The nucleus inside also gradually split into two, and finally even the body was completely split. Yeah, that's it. Keep going. It was the first time Guo Sen witnessed the whole process. He was very satisfied. This was the first split. The experiment was considered a success. He checked around, but found that there seemed to be no individuals with even the slightest change in the newly split red gate. Guo Sen observed that the ordinary green gate also began to split and reproduce almost at the same time. Under his intervention, the splitting speed of the red gate was faster than the green gate. Guo Sen knew that it would not be successful so quickly. If he continued to repeat this process, there would always be red gates that could produce special genes. In this way, Guo Sen repeated it dozens of times without getting tired. However, the strange thing is that the red gates did not evolve, and some of them even had a bit of degeneration. The spikes became shorter and the pincers became smaller. Only the number was steadily increasing. Strange, why? He was a little confused. He thought that with his intervention, the evolution would be faster, but he didn't expect that in addition to the number, they actually developed in the opposite direction. Guo Sen looked at another area, and then the special green gates were completely in a free-range mode. They were eating algae, and playing and laughing. Their numbers were already quite large. Without being hunted by Xiao Hong, these guys lived too leisurely. Apart from eating, they kept splitting and reproducing. Guo Sen looked around inside and really found a lot of completely different ones. He picked out a few and observed them carefully. The changes in the few in front of him were actually quite obvious. Perhaps in order to grab food faster, the tail evolved a jet hole, and even the flagellum became two. The body was also gradually smoother than the previous cylindrical shape. The head became a little pointed, and the whole body was spindle-shaped, which provided conditions for their high speed. However, Guo Sen was more confused at this time. Xiao Hong, who was controlled with great effort, did not change, but how come Xiao Lu, who was released, changed? What went wrong? Guo Sen pondered for a long time with doubts. He couldn't figure it out, so he turned back and looked at the water area where the meteorite was at the beginning. As a result, something that surprised him very much happened. Whether it was Xiao Han or Xiao Lu, although their speed was relatively slow, they had some changes. Some of the little reds even seemed to be much larger than before, and there seemed to be more tiny single-celled organisms in the water. The number of single-celled organisms was larger, and the types were more numerous. They even expanded the water area they occupied. This made Guo Sen even more confused. Active intervention was useless, but the ones that were released had changed first. This was simply absurd. Why on earth? He kept thinking about this question after circling the mother planet for many times. After a long time of thinking, he found that they had changed again. The selected little reds were no longer under his control, and they were still clumsy in hunting and killing each other as before. And among the ordinary little greens, like the little greens in other places, some individuals actually began to evolve. What's going on? Guo Sen went to find the special little greens again to see if they had any changes. It turned out that there were only a few hundred special little greens left. No matter how hard he looked in that area of water, he couldn't find many. Hey, where did they go? There must be at least tens of thousands. He thought at first that he remembered the wrong location, but he searched the nearby area and couldn't find more. Guo Sen, who was a little depressed, began to ponder. He suddenly remembered a story. There was a group of deer and a group of wolves in a wildlife reserve in a certain country. People killed the wolves to protect the deer, and the deer began to die. Later, the wolves were reintroduced, and the deer began to thrive. Isn't the situation of this special little green equivalent to that of the deer? Without the pressure of competition, these guys slowly degenerated and went extinct after rapidly reproducing. Guo Sen began to reflect. He felt that he thought too simply at the beginning. Or, he underestimated the concept of evolution. Evolution requires a longer time and a freer environment. If intervention is imposed, it will be counterproductive, causing the population to degenerate or even extinct. However, if there is no active intervention, their evolution speed is too slow. Guo Sen felt that effective intervention should be carried out in a scientific manner. For this, he had to do some comparative tests at the same time. Fortunately, he had made thousands of backups for insurance before, which gave him enough room to make mistakes. Okay, there is no time to regret it. Let's check the status of all the backups first, and then try and find the right way. Guo Sen thought so, and began to check all the backups in the world. This process was a bit boring. He tried his best to remember the characteristics of each single cell cluster carefully, and recorded them in his mind, which had become much more powerful now. However, after going back so far, Guo Sen also came to a conclusion. Except for the small part of his own experiment, the remaining more than 2000 clusters are actually similar. The evolution of the little reds is very slow, while the little greens seem to be faster. The number of unique individuals is gradually increasing, and there is even a trend of replacing the original group. Guo Sen also understands that this is called survival of the fittest, the law of nature. Then, what I have to do is to use the 5 tribes as a test field, make different interventions one by one, and then see the specific situation. Thinking of this, Guo Sen had already returned to the place where life began next to the meteorite. He looked at the tribe that had developed and reproduced quite rapidly, and he had made up his mind. Chapter 5 Big White Dumplings. Guo Sen started his new experiment. First, he had to select a group of faster evolving species from each of the 5 shallow waters that originally had a complete ecosystem. This was a piece of cake for him. Soon, 5 water drops rich in life were extracted from each shallow water and placed in 5 waters with almost the same environment, connected to each other, but not too close. In this way, the first step was completed. Guo Sen kept his composure and did not intervene in the ecosystem of the little guys right away. He wanted these little guys to adapt to the new environment. Unlike last time, he did not completely separate the special little red and the special little green, but mixed them together, just like the original. These little guys did not seem to feel that the environment they were in was different. They still performed all the behaviors they would do originally, eating and splitting. At the same time, the seaweed that the little green followed over to eat has now begun to occupy this area of water. Guo Sen felt that these seaweeds should be the common ancestors of the plants that will occupy the land and the sea in the future. Under the influence of temperature and sunlight, these algae seem to grow very fast. Even if the number of small greens is huge and they divide quickly, they can't catch up with their speed of continuous growth. Okay, let's start the next step. After a while, Guo Sen waited for them to adapt to the environment and started the second step. 5 tribes require 5 different intervention methods. Area 1 is to completely intervene in a part of the small reds, so that they only focus on eating and dividing, and no longer attack each other. Area 2 is to completely intervene in a part of the small greens, speed up their eating and dividing speed, and reduce the time they do other things. Area 3 is to reduce the living environment space between all the small reds and small greens. Area 4 expands the space between them. Area 5 is the one that needs careful management. Guo Sen will intervene in both sides, but not completely like the first failed intervention. Instead, he will pick one from each side and let it eat and divide according to his own ideas to see if it can have an impact on the others. Among the 5 methods, Area 3 and Area 4 will not take much effort. GUOSEN only needs to control their range of activities. As for the remaining 3, GUOSEN felt that Area 5 required the most effort. He first looked at Area 1. This area was almost exactly the same as the previous experiment, but he decided to go faster this time. GUOSEN directly controlled some of the little reds, and like controlling hundreds of hungry wolves, he went straight to the seaweed where the little greens gathered. Soon, the little reds controlled by GUOSEN each grabbed the little greens and ate them, while those little greens seemed to have not yet fully reacted, and some of them were still chewing the seaweed stupidly. After repeating this several times, the little reds began to split. Looking at the remaining little reds, they were still clumsily catching the little greens, and even when the controlled little reds split for the second time, some of them did not even complete the first split. GUOSEN completed a round of experiments in Area 1, and he looked at Area 2. In Area 2, he wanted to control some of the little greens. However, he had a new idea at this time. He placed the selected little greens very close to the little reds, and then waited for these hunters to attack. Seeing the food coming to them, the little reds instinctively rushed over. GUOSEN immediately controlled the little greens to dodge quickly. The little reds who missed seemed to be confused and all stopped there motionless. GUOSEN controlled the little greens to dangle in front of them again, and the little reds missed again. After many cycles, the little reds attacked the little greens that were farther away and much easier to catch. GUOSEN was thoughtful. This was a bit beyond his expectations. He had thought that the little reds would keep attacking the little greens that were closer to them, but he didn't expect that these guys would be flexible and retreat when faced with difficulties. However, would this affect the evolution of both sides? GUOSEN didn't know. At this moment, he suddenly found that a large meteorite in space was flying towards him at a high speed. Are you making trouble at this time? GUOSEN could only affect his own planet, but he could do nothing about those meteorites. But if this meteorite hits the test object by some chance, the meteorite is getting closer and closer. GUOSEN roughly calculated its size, which seems to be 1/50th of his. This guy must be attracted by his own gravity. If he hits the land or the ocean, let alone the small creatures, everything on his entire sphere will cease to exist. Wait, gravity? GUOSEN suddenly understood something. He can affect himself. What if he can increase his gravity? GUOSEN then adjusted the gravity of the center of the ball. In the process, he suddenly found that the meteorite, which was originally rushing straight, suddenly turned its orbit, as if it had been hit. Oh. GUOSEN saw it getting closer and closer to him, but it drew an arc at a relatively safe distance. The arc was relatively irregular at first, but as time passed, it increasingly changed from an ellipse to a circle, and its rotation gradually became smoother, and finally it became always facing him with one side. GUOSEN also began to observe this uninvited guest carefully. It was an almost pure white asteroid, a little bigger than he had expected, with a very smooth surface, and not so many craters. It looked very interesting. The sphere was not a regular circle, but a deflated sphere, with relatively flat ends, and a strange bulge in the center, with unusually many wrinkles on it, which should be a circle of mountains surrounding the center of its star. From GUOSEN's perspective, this guy looked like a big white dumpling. Haha, is this dumpling my satellite? GUOSEN was a little proud. He didn't expect that he actually had a satellite. He was obviously the satellite of the green gas planet opposite. The satellite of the satellite. This wonderful celestial structure was formed in this way. But at this moment, GUOSEN suddenly discovered that the seawater on his sphere, which was originally extremely calm, suddenly began to set off violent waves. In some places, even tsunamis tens of meters high were rolled up. The deep blue sea water rolled up the waves and kept hitting the land, and the waves splashed. Ah, wait, I said something was wrong. It turned out to be this. Waves. It's waves. He was extremely happy about this. However, this joy soon turned into worry. It's over. My creatures. GUOSEN thought of his nearly 2,000 biological settlements around the world. After checking around, he found that almost all the biological communities were destroyed. Previously, he had stored almost all the backups in shallow water very close to the coast. As a result, the waves raised and slammed these almost insignificant little guys onto the land. When the water receded, most of them were left on the shore and died directly. Guo Sen had no time to be sad. He quickly began to collect the remaining life settlements. In the end, he even searched all over the world and found that there were not many left. With a nervous mood, he looked at the place where the 5 experimental fields were located. Chapter 6, Unknowns. Fortunately, the 5 biological gathering areas were safe and sound. Guo Sen breathed a sigh of relief. He had accidentally placed them in a place relatively far from the land, but he didn't expect that this approach would actually save these little guys. Oh, what's going on? Should we move them to a safer place? Guo Sen felt that they should not be allowed to experience the cruelty of nature again. Occasional emergencies could easily wipe out these fragile creatures. He decided to create a safer environment. After thinking about it, he decided to build a saltwater lake that was connected to the ocean, but at a distance, in a safe area that would not be affected by the waves. Guo Sen did it as soon as he thought of it. He knew that on the original Earth, tsunamis would sometimes occur for various reasons. If these little guys happened to be affected, all the things he had done before would be in vain. He searched for a while and finally determined the location. It was a meteorite crater not far from this ocean. The diameter of the meteorite crater was nearly 10 kilometers, and it was only about 5 kilometers away from the ocean. Guo Sen did not clumsily pour the salt water from the ocean into the crater bit by bit, but decided to open a channel between the crater and the ocean. This kind of thing is nothing in front of Guo Senator. He easily separated the land into a crack several dozen meters wide and made a slope. The surging seawater also obediently poured into the crater along the crack. The seawater poured more and more, gradually filling up the originally deep crater until it was exactly the same as the sea level. Guo Sen looked at it and thought it was okay. He wrapped the little guys in the 5 test areas with seawater and successfully transported them to their new home. Guo Sen originally wanted to pack up the remaining ones and put them in the lake, but he thought about it again and finally gave up the idea. He only transported 1/10 of them to the lake and placed them a little further away from the test area. The rest, let them feel the cruelty of nature. Guo Sen can't be distracted and care about too many things. After all, even if he has become such an almost omnipotent planet, there are very limited things he can do. We must devote our limited energy to those little guys who have been well protected. The experiment must continue. After losing so much, we have to start over. Guo Sen's previous experimental observation process had been interrupted by the asteroid that has now become a satellite, and it has been delayed for quite a long time. How are the current experimental subjects now? He first looked at Area 1. It has been a long time since the completion of a round of experiments. How have they changed? Guo Sen observed carefully. He unexpectedly found that the number of the little reds that were originally controlled by him has become extremely scarce, and each of them seems to be malnourished and much smaller. The changes in the little greens surprised Guo Sen very much. Their speed is more than twice as fast as when Guo Sen first observed it, and the number has also increased many times. He observed that the speed of division of these little guys seems to be amazingly fast, and their size is also much larger than before. Guo Sen thought for a long time, but he didn't understand what happened here. He looked at Area 2 again. Here, whether it is little red or little green, there are actually not many left. Strange, could it be the previous waves? No, if that's the case, everyone should be washed away. Guo Sen looked at the remaining 3 areas with doubts. These areas did not have time to intervene because of the sudden incident of the big dumpling asteroid. The current situation is exactly the same as before, and each area maintains a balanced state. Guo Sen thought about it for a long time and found it really hard to understand. After all, he did not continue to intervene for such a long time. Could it be that there are some other things interfering in it? Guo Sen decided to start the experiment again. This time, because there is not much change in areas 3 and 4, whether it is expanding or shrinking the living range, they are just different in number. Guo Sen decided to do 3 experimental areas this time. He wanted to take a good look at what happened to number 1 and number 2. However, he did not do it one by one this time, but changed a method. He also noticed before that he could control some single-celled organisms in multiple ways. What would happen if he controlled 3 areas at the same time? The answer is of course yes. He can control them at the same time, but it will take more energy. This will also be a more scientific way to conduct this experiment. If he controls them at the same time, he can also speed up the evolution, provided that his intervention can really make them evolve. Guo Sen looked at Area 1 and controlled a group of little reds. The little greens in Area 2 were also controlled at the same time, just like before. As for Area 3, he had not done experiments before, so he tried it tentatively this time. Guo Sen focused on Area 3, that is, he controlled a little red and a little green respectively to see if their actions would have any impact on the two parties. The little red he controlled was a guy who looked like a hedgehog, and the spikes all over his body were very deterrent. In order to make it easier to remember, Guo Sen named it Little Thornhead. Another point, Guo Sen also noticed that this kind of little red was less likely to be eaten by other little reds because of its almost invincible defensive spikes. This is also an advantage in case he was killed by other little reds when he was not paying attention. He immediately controlled the little thorn to drive the little greens like a flock of sheep and soon scattered them around the green algae. Of course, except for the little green he controlled. The little green he controlled was a super fast guy with 2 flagella, and he called this guy a Fei. A Fei's role was to constantly make trouble in the group of little reds, attract their attention, and then quickly get rid of them with agility. Soon, 1 red and 1 green turned this small area upside down. Under Guo Sen's control, the 2 little guys performed their duties and gave full play to the spirit of stirring, which made both parties fall into a state of confusion at the beginning. On one side, the little reds ran around a Fei, and on the other side, the little thorn chased countless little greens. Soon, Area 3 was completely in chaos. However, this chaos only lasted for a while, and the situation fell into the previous situation of Area 1 and Area 2. Those little reds gave up chasing our Fei and turned to other little greens, and the little greens who escaped from the little thorn also began to eat and split crazily. This is simply a combination of Areas 1 and 2. Guo Sen raised his eyes and noticed that Areas 1 and 2 also became the same situation as before the arrival of the meteorite almost at the same time. In general, the current development situation seems to be completely under his control. As for why in the end, the little greens in Area 1 increased sharply, and Area 2 was almost extinct. What happened here? Guo Sen paid close attention to Areas 1 and 2. He must find out the reason for this situation. After all, what will happen in Area 3 is also unknown. Chapter 7 Evolution. Guo Sen kept orbiting the mother planet. Time also passed gradually in this process. Areas 1 and 2, which he paid close attention to, had begun to change. In Area 1, Guo Sen noticed that the reds began to split after eating frantically, which led to a great increase in the population. Their existence even threatened other reds that were not under control. The greens that survived from the vicious reds under his control seemed to have a strong sense of crisis, and the speed of splitting increased a lot. Guo Sen carefully calculated that, even if the reds split fast enough, the speed of the greens that evolved was even twice as fast as them. The splitting of the surviving greens was not as obvious as before, but was developing towards smaller sizes, and some began to distribute to more distant areas. As time passed, the ordinary reds, who had less and less food, began to kill each other, tearing up their own kind, and attacking the large number of reds controlled by Guo Senator. Soon, the number of reds began to decrease greatly, and even the speed at which they split could not keep up with the speed of killing each other. As for evolution, Guo Sen could see that those he controlled not only did not evolve, but degenerated a lot. Whether in speed or attack power, they could not compare with the ordinary reds fighting for food. As the greens who escaped to the distance continued to eat and split, the population not only recovered to its original level, but even relied on the seaweed food that had become a huge group in this shallow water, gradually having a larger distribution area and a larger population. As time passed, there were almost not many reds left, and because they were far away from the habitat of the greens, they began to die. The dead reds became food for other reds. A vicious cycle. Guo Sen sighed in his heart. He understood what happened in the former Area 1 during that blank period. At the same time, Area 2 also evolved into a situation where there were not many reds and greens left, just like before. Guo Sen also saw all the developments. The huge population created by the rapid reproduction of the little greens also benefited the little reds. With sufficient food, the little reds began to split wildly. However, after the number of little reds became large, more and more little greens were eliminated. The development after that seemed to be even worse than that of pool number 1. The little greens were eaten to the point of being few, but they had no time to develop far away, and the little reds began to kill each other. The result was that both sides suffered. Guo Sen also understood that there was no need to experiment in areas 1 and 2. The conclusion showed that he had failed. He looked at area number 3. The development here seemed to be moving towards the best situation. Guo Sen had noticed before that in the original community, the population ratio of little reds to little greens was about 1 to 9, which was also the best ratio for them to maintain balance. And area number 3 was able to perfectly replicate this after such a long time. This was all thanks to the constant stirring of the little troublemakers and Arfei in this area. The pursuit of the little thornhead reduced the number of the hiding little greens for a time, but then gradually recovered. However, their speed was greatly enhanced. Their body shape continued to develop in the direction of spindle shape, and even symmetrical flagella grew on both sides of their bodies, so that they could become faster in the process of swimming in the water. Their body shape was relatively smaller, and their color was closer to the green of algae, so that they could hide in the seaweed and escape the attack of the little red. As for the little red, the change seemed to be even greater. There were originally all kinds of strange shapes in this group of predators, but now it seems that there are more types. However, it seems that they have made every effort to evolve their weapons. The thorns with thorns have become longer and larger. The ones with fangs in their mouths have more and sharper teeth. Some even evolved madly in terms of speed, with a body shape similar to that of the little greens, with spikes on the sides of their bodies, and used speed to cut through the bodies of nearby little greens to prey. As for the little thorn and Afei, Guo Sen found sadly that, even though the two guys kept splitting, they were gradually degenerating, and even developing in a lower direction. The experiment seemed to be very successful so far, but no matter how many and how fast the single-celled organisms evolved, they seemed unable to quickly become multi-celled organisms. Guo Sen looked at the other naturally developed populations in the saltwater lake, and the speed of evolution was completely behind this one. The experiment was successful for the time being. Guo Sen's intervention made the single-celled organisms in Area 3 evolve much faster. However, it is still impossible to judge how much faster this was in a short time. Guo Sen decided to take a break from the experiment. He was a little tired after doing so many things. He always felt that he was really strange. How could he, as a planet, always want to sleep? He closed his visual system again and fell into a deep sleep. I don't know how long it took. When Guo Sen woke up again, he wanted to see how the group of little guys in the saltwater lake were doing, but he suddenly found something strange. On the originally bare and dark land, some places near the water source suddenly became green. Oh my god, no way. Guo Sen looked closer with infinite expectation. Those were sparse and extremely short moss-like plants growing near the water. They have a simple and messy growth method. While growing close to the ground, they are constantly extending their growth tentacles in all directions, becoming more and more dense. Plants. Guo Sen originally thought that things like seaweed would be the only plants on his planet for a long time. But at this time, he didn't expect that they would successfully land during their hibernation. After a burst of ecstasy, he also noticed another change on the land. That was the soil on both sides of the river and near the coastline. Guo Sen was too focused on those small creatures before and even forgot other things. He didn't pay much attention to the various changes on the land. He thought carefully that these soils should be generated by the combined impact of rivers and oceans and weathering. The soil is basically made of fine granular gravel, without even a bit of humus. It looks extremely barren. Only small mosses can barely take root here. However, the reason why the small mosses are so short and sparse also proves the barrenness of this soil. Guo Sen carefully thought about the knowledge of the soil on the earth in his mind, but he didn't think of much. He just vaguely remembered that fertile soil was created by years of weathering, and humus transformed by plants. It seems that we really can't rush it at the moment. After all, it's useless to rush. If he takes out all the algae in the entire sphere and rolls them into a ball, it is estimated that he can't make a few square meters, not to mention that they are not enough to make fertile soil. Guo Sen aimed his sight at the saltwater lake. He must see what's going on there. After all, that's the most important. But just a glance, he was shocked by the facts in front of him. It seems that new creatures have appeared in the number 3 experimental area. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8, God of Sleep. Guo Sen didn't know how to describe these wonderful creatures that were several millimeters long. Weird. Strange. Synthetic. These words kept appearing in his mind. Like a centipede, a large grey creature with a slender body and spikes on both sides of its body was being chased by a much smaller creature that spewed purple smoke from its mouth and had scary long teeth. It was running away frantically, but not long after, it was blocked by several small monsters with spherical appearance and fast speed. The spherical monsters stretched out the spike-like straws hidden in their bodies and easily pierced the centipede monster's body. The fange monsters that arrived quickly bit the centipede monster into several pieces. Soon, some small monsters with different looks gathered around again, as if they all wanted to have a share of the pie. It didn't take long for many monsters to completely eat the centipede monster, and then they started to kill each other again. More centipede monsters in the distance quickly swam to a farther place to eat the seaweed that seemed to be magnified hundreds of times. There were also some small transparent spindle-shaped creatures like small fish that kept swimming among the seaweed and eating the tender shoots inside. Guo Sen looked at all this in front of him, and he seemed to be a little bit unbelievable in his eyes. What's going on? Where did the little red and little green go before? What did I miss during the time I was asleep? Guo Sen searched the entire saltwater lake and did see single-celled organisms like the little red and little green at that time, but there were not many of them. They did not live in the original place, but were driven to a location near the center of the lake by those monsters that were dozens of times larger than them. The habitat of the monsters has also expanded from less than 1 square meter at the beginning to all the space on the lake shore. Guo Sen controlled a centipede monster and a tusk monster and put them in another water area for careful observation and found an unexpected fact. These two guys are not simple single-celled organisms, but multicellular organisms composed of several cells and with a much more complex structure. Guo Sen was stunned for a while and then began to think about how many years he had slept. How could the world change all of a sudden? Multicellular organisms just appeared like this? He quickly raised his sight and observed the entire sphere, but found it a little strange. The ice layer at the north and south poles is much thicker than he remembered and even formed countless glaciers, and it seems to be getting worse. The ice layer area also seems to be much larger than in the past, and there are even signs of spreading to the north and south. On the other hand, the volcanoes at the junction of the plates are also restless, and they are constantly spewing magma and gas, and they are getting taller and taller. The plateau created by Guo Sen before is also covered with white snow like the north and south poles. The ice and snow have developed countless rivers, which continuously flow water into the ocean. The steam rising from the ocean, with the wind, forms precipitation on the plains and snow on the plateau. The water cycle is also gradually formed with this process. The atmosphere gradually stabilized, and its thickness increased further. Even if some small meteorites hit it occasionally, they would be burned up by it. Except for the lack of green, everything was almost like on Earth. Guo Sen looked at all this, and seemed a little unbelievable that this was himself. How many things had happened during the time he was asleep? It seemed that the original planet, which was like a desert and lifeless, had never existed. But Guo Sen was also a little excited at the same time. Everything was going more smoothly than expected, and more advanced life might appear one after another in the near future. He looked up at the almost eternal mother star, and found that the great red spot caused by the asteroid impact had almost completely disappeared. He couldn't help but smile in his heart. Those things seemed to have happened yesterday. It seemed that he had been asleep for quite a long time. Guo Sen's sight was focused on Big Dumpling again. As his moon, this guy seemed to be very conscientious. Guo Sen saw that this white guy, which had a very smooth surface when he first came, now had quite a lot of craters on it. It seemed that during the period of his sleep, it had withstood quite fierce bombardment from outer space. The meteorites seemed to have been disrupted by the gravity of this guy in their orbits towards Guo Sen, while also protecting his sphere from being bombarded, thus causing a blow to the biological community that he had finally established. However, Guo Sen always felt that this guy seemed to be much closer to him than before, as if he was gradually attracted. Thinking of this, Guo Sen reduced his gravity and pushed the orbit of this Big Dumpling outward. Unexpectedly, this guy was getting farther and farther away from him, and the orbit also drew a strange arc. Guo Sen stared at the mother star opposite and immediately knew what happened to the Big Dumpling. It was constantly pulled by the gravity of the mother star, and it might become a satellite of the mother star. How could Guo Sen allow such a thing to happen? Without the Big Dumpling, the seawater on his sphere would no longer have tidal phenomena, and it might affect more things. Damn mother planet, are you trying to steal my little brother from me? Guo Sen couldn't help but increase his gravity and began to compete with the mother planet for the dominance of the Big Dumpling. This process was extremely difficult. The Big Dumpling didn't seem to have an easy time under the competition between the mother planet and Guo Senator. Even part of the star body gradually cracked, and the broken rocks on the body even flew into outer space. After a long stalemate, it might be that the Big Dumpling was not so far away from him, or it might be for other reasons. It finally gradually freed itself from the strong gravity of the mother planet and gradually began to revolve towards him. Guo Sen couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief in his heart. He really didn't expect that he almost lost something important with just one thought. He adjusted the gravity, and the Big Dumpling slowly returned to its normal orbit. But Guo Sen was still a little surprised. Why did the Big Dumpling get closer and closer to him before? What happened? After resolving the accident, Guo Sen once again turned his attention to the little guys, who had evolved into multicellular organisms. Their safety was also what he cared about most. However, he unexpectedly discovered that the saltwater lake had suddenly disappeared. Guo Sen carefully compared the coordinates of the place where the saltwater lake was located in his memory, and what he saw was a shallow bay submerged by seawater. In the process of fighting for the Big Dumpling, a tsunami happened there. Fuck, it's over. Guo Sen hurriedly searched for those multicellular organisms in that place. But it is not easy to find something that is less than 1 millimeter, especially in this boundless sea. Guo Sen searched almost all the nearby coasts before finding a small group near the mouth of a river. The rest, no matter how hard he looked, Guo Sen never found them again. They may have been hit by the tide to a farther land and then roasted to death by the sun, or they may have been taken to the deep sea by the sea. He didn't expect that when dealing with the Big Dumpling, the result would also cause such an impact on himself. Chapter 9 The whole thing is green. Guo Sen felt that he was actually quite lucky. At least every time such a big accident happened, those little guys were strong enough to survive and would not be killed so easily. This was also a point that made him feel relieved. Looking at the hundreds of multicellular organisms that existed in just a few square meters of the river estuary, Guo Sen also realized that he seemed to have quite a lot of things to do. The first thing to do was to build a saltwater lake again. This kind of work is no longer a difficult task once it has been done once, especially for Guo Senator. He found that his telekinesis, or something like superpowers, can do almost anything, provided that it is on his own planet. Guo Sen quickly found a meteorite crater. This meteorite crater is special in that it seems to be a collapse caused by several meteorite craters connected together. The area seems to be very large, with a radius of more than 100 kilometers. Guo Sen estimated that this place is about 10 kilometers away from the coast, which should be safer than the previous one. At least it will not be easily destroyed by tsunamis or floods. He soon opened a wide crack in the ground, which gradually led to the sea. The surging seawater also poured into the large crater along this crack. Soon, the seawater covered this area. With the strong wind blowing, the blue lake water began to hit the lake shore. However, Guo Sen was still a little worried. He adjusted the height of the land a few dozen meters outside the lake shore, creating an airtight stone wall nearly 20 meters high, which also provided a layer of insurance for the entire saltwater lake. Then, Guo Sen transported a considerable amount of stones from some stone mountains not far away, and placed them on the shore. What he had to do was to shorten the formation process of the original soil and save time to allow the lake shore to have the basic conditions for growing plants. If the lake water was slowly washed away, it would take a long time to complete. Guo Sen lifted countless boulders and used his telekinesis to instantly break them into sand-like fragments and then poured this thick layer on the lake shore. Then, he shifted his sights again. After searching for a while, he found some mosses on the riverbank that had not been submerged by the previous tide. These tenacious little lives must also be protected and reproduced. Otherwise, who knows when an accident will completely destroy them after they have finally landed. Guo Sen carefully took some of the moss from each of the several moss gathering areas, moved them to the lake shore together with the soil there, and planted them at a certain distance. In this way, the basic greening was done. After doing this, he gathered the small creatures on the other side of the estuary together and put them into the new saltwater lake. The small creatures almost didn't notice the change in the residential address. They quickly adapted to the lake water and even started to reproduce again. The first thing Guo Sen discovered that it began to reproduce was a guy who had seen it before, with a slender body like a centipede and spikes on both sides. Their number seemed to account for the largest proportion of this group of organisms. They almost all entrenched around the seaweed, moving slowly and in large size. Guo Sen saw that this centipede monster was far away from the hunting range of predators and stretched out a tentacle on the edge of a relatively remote seaweed. The tentacle body wall extends outward and is divided into 5 small translucent forked tentacles. They look like a miniature centipede monster. As time goes by, the forked tentacles gradually grow larger and look almost exactly the same as the mother body. Finally, the connection gradually narrows and it detaches from the mother body and sticks to the seaweed. It's a bit like split reproduction, but it's also a bit different. What is this? Just as Guo Sen was thinking, like lightning, the mother body was suddenly cut into 2 sections. Then, a small monster with a mouth but as sharp as a pair of scissors swooped down from the still active part of the centipede monster's body several times again, and cut several more sections. Soon, like sharks smelling blood, many carnivorous monsters that were originally in the distance swam over collectively and began to feast around the corpse of the centipede monster. After a while, Guo Sen saw that the gang of villains started to kill each other again. The seaweed edge that was so peaceful just now has now become a surer field, and the smell of horror is pervasive. Time passed slowly, and the carnivorous monsters finally left. The big centipede monster didn't even have any residue left, only the 5 small centipede monsters in the deep seaweed. The small centipede monsters grew up quickly. It didn't take long for them to eat the seaweed around them, and their size became closer and closer to that of adults. The few that occasionally swam out were unfortunately preyed on by carnivores, and the survivors began a new round of reproduction again. Guo Sen looked at all this and felt the cruelty of nature. At the same time, he was in awe of the cycle of life. He circled the mother planet many times. He wanted to rely on the passage of time to expand the biological population in the lake as soon as possible, but this little bit was not enough at the moment. It was not enough for him to do new experiments. Guo Sen thought very clearly. He knew that, in order to make these little guys evolve quickly, he had to intervene effectively like last time. Otherwise, who knows when they will make progress. After a while, Guo Sen turned back to look at the saltwater lake. He found that the lakeshore surrounded by towering rocks suddenly turned completely light green. Guo Sen's heart soon jumped up. Needless to say, it was the mosses. He moved closer and observed carefully. From a distance, it looked green, but when he looked closer, he found that it was not so dense. It was almost the same as what Guo Sen had seen on the beach before, and even the species were almost similar. He looked at these with joy, and then checked the distribution of mosses around the world. Guo Sen spent some time, and came to a conclusion. The reproductive ability of this moss seems to be quite amazing. As long as there is water, as long as it can be connected to the sea, they can grow and multiply tenaciously, pouring down the tender green. Even if the soil has almost no nutrients. Guo Sen hopes that these mosses can accelerate their evolution, slowly spread green all over the planet, and gradually form a layer of fertile soil in the process of reproduction. This requires the magic of time to change. Guo Sen can intervene in those little reds and greens, but he can't do anything to plants. At most, he can do is to gradually extend their habitat inland. Of course, he still has a lot to do here. For example, countless hard rocks are ground into powder to make the most basic barren soil. Chapter 10 Ice Age. While constantly crushing rocks to make soil, Guo Sen did not forget to observe the small creatures in the saltwater lake. They have multiplied a considerable number of populations during this period. The point that was less than 10 square meters at the edge of the lake has now grown to control nearly 100 square meters of territory, and is still expanding. As for the seaweeds with super reproductive ability, they even extended their tentacles to the position close to the center of the lake. Their presence floating on the water surface even gradually dyed the blue lake water green. Some aquatic plants as thick as needles grew near the shore of the lake. As the waves fluttered, Guo Sen even saw that some multicellular organisms also lived here, which was a phenomenon that did not exist before. Near the center of the lake, Guo Sen also found a considerable number of single-celled organisms swimming constantly, just like the little green and little red ones at the beginning, but the species seemed to be more numerous. Guo Sen was delighted to see that this small ecosystem seemed to be constantly repairing and growing under the baptism of time. Gradually, the entire saltwater lake was full of vitality. He spent so much energy, and this was the reward. With a gratified mood, Guo Sen looked carefully at his main target, those multicellular organisms. The number is enough, and he can start experiments again, to let these little guys start the process of accelerating evolution again. Unexpectedly, it seems that more types of multicellular organisms have appeared in the lake. Guo Sen counted them. Compared with before, there are more than 20 kinds of carnivorous multicellular organisms and herbivorous multicellular organisms. Even if they are not counted in detail, there are nearly more than 100 kinds. He was very excited. Life seemed to be striding towards a more prosperous direction. However, this also caused some difficulties for his experiment. Should I choose the small parts for the experiment, or include all of them? Guo Sen hesitated for a while, and decided to include all the multicellular organisms together. The collective co-evolution can make the entire ecosystem more balanced than individual evolution. He quickly selected 2 lucky ones. He chose a strange guy with 6 tentacles and 2 spikes on the mouth from the carnivorous multicellular organisms. Guo Sen called it 6-legged monster. As for the herbivorous side, Guo Sen still pursued the advantage of speed this time. He found a guy with a head like a blue sphere and the rest of the body like a ruler. It is worth noting that there is a strange bulge on its tail. Its name is naturally the ruler monster. Okay, the experiment will start soon. If it goes well. Guo Sen suppressed his excitement and started the operation immediately. His idea was exactly the same as last time, that is, to use the spirit of stirring to make both parties feel a sense of crisis, and then each party will start to evolve crazily. However, what Guo Sen didn't expect was that he soon encountered an accident. Under his control, the ruler monster swam to a gathering place of reds and provoked them. When the reds surrounded it and were about to swim away, its tail suddenly flashed automatically. Then, the group of reds seemed to be dead and completely motionless. What the hell? Before GUOSEN could react, the other little reds that had gathered around him began to tear up the bodies of the little reds that seemed to be dead. GUOSEN looked at the ruler monster and controlled it to get closer to a few more little reds. When it was about to be caught, its tail flashed again, and the little reds seemed to be dead and motionless. Now, GUOSEN understood. The tail of the ruler monster will automatically discharge electricity in times of crisis. When did this evolve? There is no reason for it to be charged, right? He looked at the little greens again, carefully looking at each species, and after checking a lot, he found something very remarkable. These guys seem to have evolved all kinds of awesome features. Hiding in the seaweed using protective colors, growing a bunch of flagella to make their speed incredibly fast, and having extremely hard appearances are fighting against the little reds. Looking closely at the group of little reds, he even found the existence of guys with fangs almost all over their bodies. GUOSEN looked at these, and suddenly felt that there didn't seem to be too many things he wanted to do. Although he had not intervened, these guys had evolved so fast, far beyond his imagination. Before evolving from single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms, they all had single repetitive characteristics and looked simple. After becoming multi-celled organisms, there was a big explosion of evolution. It continued to evolve in a more complex and practical direction. GUOSEN thought for a while, and decided not to do experiments to promote evolution, but chose another route. Expand their population further. It is far from enough for these multi-celled organisms to reproduce and thrive only in the saltwater lake. The overall area of the ocean on GUOSEN's sphere is tens of thousands of times larger than this saltwater lake. The birth of life is not enough to rely on the evolution of a small group. Only by continuously expanding the group can the evolution of these small lives be further promoted. GUOSEN made up his mind and began to carefully select the types of these small organisms and look for new habitats. His sphere is extremely large, and the ocean occupies a considerable proportion. Relying on the fact that these multicellular organisms generally live near the sea, GUOSEN first placed a part of them near the coast not far away. He observed for a while and found that the height difference of the waves here was not too obvious, so there should not be any tsunamis. GUOSEN began to move. After the creatures in this area multiplied, he moved part of this part to another place. This process lasted for a long time. When almost all the waters suitable for survival were inhabited by these little guys, GUOSEN even found that some of them had even evolved something similar to bones. He felt that he really didn't need to do anything else in terms of evolution. What should be done is to provide them with a large environment suitable for survival. As a planet, this is also what GUOSEN is best at. Looking up at the global environment, he suddenly found something that he had completely overlooked. That is, the temperature of the entire planet seems to have dropped too much compared to before. The average temperature had been maintained at 40 to 50 degrees before, but now it is less than 20 degrees. GUOSEN immediately found the culprit. Those were the ice fields that were supposed to be located at the North and South poles. Now, they are gradually developing in opposite directions, and even extending to a position close to the center of the sphere. Ice Age. Is that what it's called? GUOSEN quickly remembered the term. Along with the Ice Age, there is the extinction of life species. Those plants that have finally landed and rely on temperature to survive will definitely not be able to survive the invasion of low temperatures, and the little guys in the ocean are even more so. Countermeasures must be taken. Volcanoes erupt again. The fire of hell instantly erupted from GUOSEN's land and ocean and began to reheat his planet, which had become cold. Chapter 11 I don't want to be your little brother. The erupting volcanoes immediately began to heat up the temperature of the entire planet, and the average temperature of the planet, which had been decreasing, gradually rose again. The glaciers continued to melt and retreat, breaking into countless icebergs. In order to prevent the icebergs from hitting the small lives on the shore, GUOSEN controlled the icebergs and threw them directly back to the North and South poles. After a while, as the temperature gradually rose, the glaciers gradually retreated to the vicinity of the poles. After they were no longer so large, GUOSEN stopped. He also forced some of the erupting volcanoes to dormant, but only let less than 1/5 of the volcanoes continue to erupt. After such an operation, after a while, Guo Sen stabilized the temperature of the entire planet to about 40 degrees again. The large amount of melting of glaciers has caused the global water level to rise a lot. He raised the land a few dozen meters and expanded the land area a little before stopping. Guo Sen breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He really spent a lot of energy this time. However, thinking that these efforts were to create a good environment for the survival of those small lives, he also felt that it was worth it. After all, if they continue like this, the little guys will begin their great evolutionary journey and eventually become countless creatures with wisdom. By then, Guo Sen might really have someone to chat with and relieve his boredom. Thinking of this, he also accelerated the speed of making primitive soil. Cutting countless boulders from the rock mass and grinding them into pieces is much more boring than before, but it can also greatly shorten the difficulty of plants landing and even lay the foundation for them to spread to places closer to the inland in the future. The work of making soil has been going on, and Guo Sen looked up at the green mother star in the distance. He discovered something very important. Because he is a satellite, he has been orbiting this guy and is tidally locked. This also caused the sad fact that he does not have 4 seasons. Now the temperature on the sphere also proves this point. It is not like the Earth, which has 4 seasons near the temperate zone. This will undoubtedly make the plant population and biological population on his body have to accept the fate of only summer in the future. Looking at the huge red star in the distance behind him, Guo Sen is now a little dissatisfied. If he could circle around this star, he wouldn't have to worry about such things. He wouldn't have to worry about the coming of the ice age all the time, and he wouldn't have to rely on volcanic eruptions to maintain the temperature. Because of this mother star, he didn't even get that much light. A dangerous and bold idea suddenly came to his mind. How about getting rid of this guy, getting rid of being a satellite, and becoming a planet? Guo Sen actually knew very well that this thing would never be done under normal circumstances. After getting rid of the strong gravity of the mother star, he would have to adjust the orbit of the star to ensure that he would not be pulled over by the gravity of the star. All of this, just thinking about it, felt too bold. However, Guo Sen also had some things that he couldn't tolerate. What he wanted to do was a planet similar to the Earth, not to spend countless days with only summer around this green stupid guy. Guo Sen's dangerous idea gradually expanded in his mind, and even if he kept rubbing the rocks into sand, he couldn't stop the continued expansion of this idea. I quit. After circling around the mother star for countless times, Guo Sen couldn't bear it anymore. As a second-class citizen of the entire galaxy, this life is too frustrating, especially when you can only face the mother planet with one side. It's uncomfortable to think about it. Guo Sen felt that only by being on an equal footing with the mother planet can he get rid of his anger. If possible, why not give it a try first? Even if there is only a 1 in a million chance. Guo Sen thought so, and prepared to start fighting against the mother planet. What he has to do is to use this almost omnipotent telekinesis to gradually get rid of the gravity of the mother planet. Guo Sen had previously realized a fact, that is, even if he didn't want to, there was a force like a magnet in the orbit during the revolution, forcing him to circle the mother planet in an irregular circle. Guo Sen has been submissive for so long, and didn't take this matter seriously. After all, he didn't think it was a bad thing before. But now, he is not happy. Try to resist? Guo Sen used his telekinesis. He wants to gradually expand the orbit around this planet and finally get rid of its control completely. The first step is often the most difficult. Guo Sen also had this realization. But he didn't expect it to be so difficult. His telekinesis only resisted slightly, and he was caught by an extremely powerful force. Guo Sen understood that this was the gravity that bound his mother planet, and it was also because of this gravity that there were dozens of satellite brothers around him to circle around. However, if he didn't resist, he would never know what the result would be. He started a tug-of-war with the mother planet. But after a stalemate, Guo Sen felt that the method of pulling out hard seemed to be unworkable. The huge gravity would not let him go out so easily. So, what about accelerating the rotation? Guo Sen immediately went to do the experiment. The result made him realize that this was even more impossible. The opponent was still gravity, and this method was still useless. Guo Sen was in great distress and had to continue to orbit around the green planet while also thinking hard about countermeasures. After turning a few times, he suddenly discovered something he had ignored for a long time: the shape of the orbit of revolution. It was slightly like an elliptical orbit, which sometimes made him closer to the mother planet and sometimes farther away. What if he plays gravitational tug-of-war with the mother planet when he reaches the farthest distance? Guo Sen soon got the chance. He was close to that position. Come on. Guo Sen tried his best. At the same time, the powerful force started wrestling with him again. However, after Guo Sen persisted for less than a while, this method was easily defeated by the power of the mother planet. He still couldn't challenge the powerful opponent. Damn, what should I do? Guo Sen was a little anxious. As long as he pulled it out hard, it would not work, even if it was at a relatively farther position from the gravity. In order to calm down, he shifted his sight and started rubbing the sand again. The boulders were trampled and gradually fell apart. Guo Sen was thinking about countermeasures, and he was a little absent-minded. When he paid attention, he found that he had actually made two stone balls, one large and one small. Am I a little obsessed? Guo Sen laughed at himself in his heart. Looking at the stone balls, he was about to crush them, and suddenly felt that this could also intuitively simulate himself and the mother planet. Soon, under Guo Sen's control, the marble-like small stone balls gradually began to circle around the large stone ball that was as big as a fitness ball. Of course, Guo Sen also accurately simulated the shape of the track. Pulling it outwards definitely won't work, so what should I do? Right. Guo Sen looked at the two stone balls and suddenly had a new idea. Chapter 12. Crossing the blockade. Guo Sen was a little excited. He found a breakthrough point. He couldn't wait to start practicing this idea. Soon, he ran to the point farthest from the mother planet again. This time, he didn't force himself to pull out, but used telekinesis at a slight angle along the direction of the orbit. Guo Sen found that he had hardly encountered much resistance this time, and actually moved a long distance along the diagonal front. It was such a simple thing, but he was troubled for a long time. After drawing an arc like this, Guo Sen's orbit around the mother planet deviated a little. Not long after being happy, he found that he was bound by the strong gravity again. But to his relief, the orbit had moved a long distance outward. It works. Guo Sen was eager to try. He also understood that this first attempt was past. Now he had to stop for a while. There were still many things to consider later. For example, his brothers and sisters, the 50 or 60 satellites that orbited the mother planet with him. If he accidentally collides with any of them while moving, it will be a catastrophe for the little lives on him. Another thing to consider is a safe distance between him and the star. If he gets too close, he will be tidally locked like now, and he will be scorched by the ruthless heat wave. If he gets too far away, the ruthless ice and snow will completely cover him. Both of these points must be considered comprehensively. No matter which one, it is fatal enough. However, after thinking for a while, he still thinks it is more appropriate to move to a distance slightly farther from the star. After all, on the mother star side, the temperature of the light is actually quite high. It would be better if it is farther away. Guo Sen began to carefully check the specific position of the planetary system where he is now. He had been too focused on the life system on his sphere before, and he had never even taken a good look at the general situation of this planetary system. The huge green gas planet in front of him has a spectacular star ring. Guo Sen carefully compared and estimated that this thing is probably hundreds of times larger than himself. No wonder the gravity is so strong that it becomes too big. Among the 50 or 60 satellites of the mother star, Guo Sen is the largest one, but he himself cannot measure how big it is. As for the other satellites, there are only 7 that are spherical like him. For the rest, Guo Sen even wants to call them asteroids. If they were not all orbiting the mother star, he would not care about those pitifully small guys as the same kind. Among all the satellites, Guo Sen's position is relatively close to the middle and a little outside, and most of the small satellites are located between several star rings. Among the spherical satellites, there are also 2 smaller ones in the vicinity. On the route that Guo Sen wants to escape, there are 4 spherical satellites and 11 small satellites. This means that, if he wants to escape from here without injury, he must consider the orbits of the 15 satellites and absolutely avoid getting too close to them. At the same time, he must also pay attention to the distance at which he should orbit the star. From this point of view, the things to do on this escape journey are extremely complicated and may take a lot of time. However, what Guo Sen lacks the least is time. During the escape, the life in the sphere will slowly evolve. He has done what he should do. He has added so many layers of insurance to the hotbed of life. The rest depends on the magic of time. Therefore, Guo Sen can focus all his energy on how to become an independent planet. While Guo Sen orbits the mother planet, he constantly observes the orbits of the 3 satellites closest to him. He feels that, if he wants to shuttle through their orbits, he must pay attention to the timing. According to the previous experiment, he cannot move up or down, so he cannot use space to avoid these annoying goblins from above and below. He can only calculate their orbits and minimum safe distances, and then seek opportunities. The satellite closest to Guo Sen is a spherical satellite with a brown appearance. It is much smaller than Guo Sen, and its orbit speed is relatively slow. He carefully observed that when he orbited 3 times, this guy only turned less than half a circle, and the orbit of the orbit was basically in the upper and lower spaces with him, so it was not difficult to avoid it. The one further away was a small satellite, running at a faster speed, about the same as him, and the space of its orbit was basically the same as his. Guo Sen felt that this thing was quite dangerous. If he got too close, it might be really dangerous. The 3rd satellite was also a small satellite, and the space was too different from his, so it basically did not pose any threat. It seemed that to pass through these 3 anti-lock lines, he only needed to carefully study how to avoid the 2nd satellite. Guo Sen kept orbiting while looking for an escape route. He first followed the method last time and reached the point far away from the orbit of the mother planet and began to move outward continuously. While observing the position of the brown satellite, he quickly passed the first anti-lock line. The next thing was the most important thing: how to avoid this small satellite whose speed and orbit were about the same as his. He couldn't get too close, nor could he rush over immediately. After all, the speed of movement was much slower than the speed of revolution, not to mention that he had to orbit while moving. After observing the small satellite for a while, Guo Sen suddenly thought of a bold idea. What if he entered its orbit and his position was exactly in a straight line with it? If we become the 2 farthest points on this elliptical orbit, we can do it. Guo Sen made up his mind and started to act. He kept reducing the distance between the orbit of the small satellite, calculating when it would be farthest from him, and at the same time paying attention to the best time to be far away from the point of the orbit of the mother star. After turning hundreds of circles, Guo Sen finally got the chance. He acted quickly. The sphere rotated slowly, gradually moving to an orbit that was almost exactly the same as the small satellite, and was completely facing it. Guo Sen finally breathed a sigh of relief. After doing all this, I didn't expect that this 2nd step would take so long. He didn't have time to rest, but began to calculate ways to get over the obstacles at farther positions. The 3rd, the 4th. After a long time, Guo Sen found that there were finally only the last 2 spherical planets in front of him. But at this time, he suddenly felt that the light and heat emitted by the star seemed to be much hotter and more uncomfortable than before. The temperature on the sphere was also rising rapidly. The closer to the outermost orbit, the closer to the star. Guo Sen had anticipated this. He had made corresponding preparations before. If he hadn't thought of this, how could he have passed so many blockades? Chapter 13, Orange. After going through untold hardships and spending quite a long time, Guo Sen finally gradually moved to the position of the outer orbit of the mother star. As long as he passed between the 2 spherical satellites, he would have no obstacles and could consider when he would completely break away from the constraints of the mother star and transform from a satellite to a planet. From the original orbit to the current position, Guo Sen didn't know how many years had passed. Thousands of years. hundreds of thousands of years, or even longer. He put his attention back and did what he should do. Now he didn't have the spare time to look at the little lives. At present, he also encountered a somewhat uncomfortable thing, that is, the light and heat from the distant star. This made his spherical temperature continue to rise slowly. However, Guo Sen had been prepared for this. Long before, he completely stopped the eruption of all volcanoes on the sphere, which also gave the north and south poles the opportunity to expand strongly. When slowly approaching the limit of the control range of the mother star, the glaciers on his body began to melt again as the temperature of the sphere rose. This solved the occurrence of this fatal thing at once. Guo Sen escaped a disaster, but he didn't have time to be so arrogant. He had to cross the last obstacle as soon as possible. After crossing these two large satellites, he continued to get rid of the entanglement of the mother star's gravity. There were two spherical satellites in front of him, and Guo Sen decided to make a quick decision. Even though they were running very fast and were basically on the same spatial plane as him, Guo Sen had already orbited several times, and the expansion of the orbit also made it take him a lot longer to reach the point farthest from the mother star. After another half circle, he reached that point, but the grey planet closest to him happened to pass by nearby, so he had to give up this opportunity. Guo Sen also paid attention to the last white guy. The frequency of that guy's orbit speed seemed to be slower than his own, and it was closer to the grey star. If he wanted to create a time difference, he had to take it into account at the same time. The opportunity came soon. When Guo Sen ran to the next farthest point, the grey star happened to have passed a little, and the farther white star had not yet run to this side. He couldn't wait to start the diagonal translation. After successfully reaching the orbit of the grey star, Guo Sen saw that the white star had not arrived yet, and immediately slid onto its orbit again. Very smooth. Then, just as Guo Sen was thinking this, a white shadow suddenly passed by. What the hell? Guo Sen was shocked and broke out in a cold sweat. He looked carefully and found that it was a comet whizzing by with a big tail. His attention was on avoiding the satellites before, and he didn't pay attention to anything else. If he had passed slower before, I'm afraid this guy would have hit him. At that time, the small lives on the sphere would face a catastrophe. Guo Sen was still in shock, and just when he wanted to continue moving out, he found a half-moon shaped black and grey small celestial body that became a new obstacle. Guo Sen looked carefully at this guy, who was not discovered by him because of the dim light, and was slowly revolving around the mother star, and couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. Why does this guy look like a clove of lava garlic? It matches the big white dumpling that is still following him. However, if it is captured and becomes its new satellite, will it have a great impact on the sphere? Guo Sen remembered that when he fought with the mother planet for the satellite of Dabejiaozi last time, he almost killed all the little lives and quickly gave up the urge to capture lava garlic. He quickly dodged the slug guy and came to a farther space. But strangely, Guo Sen always felt that in this constant translation process, the huge force pulling him seemed to become smaller and smaller, more and more ethereal. He realized that it might be that he had reached the gravitational limit area that the mother planet could control. Guo Sen tried to move directly outward without waiting to reach the far point. It works. Awesome. Guo Sen felt that the force did not seem to be greater than his own telekinesis, and he could even move to a farther distance lightly. While he was constantly moving outward, he was also constantly looking around to check if there were any dangerous guys, so that if he encountered any comets or darker satellites again, he could react in time. Fortunately, there were no such guys nearby. The whole plan has been successfully progressed to halfway, and Guo Sen was able to focus his sights on the red star. What he needs to do now is to find an orbit that can revolve around this star and become a real planet. At the same time, he is constantly moving outward, and he also feels that the gravitational force of the mother star on him is getting smaller and smaller. However, the temperature of the sphere is also rising at the same time. When it revolves to the side far away from the star, the temperature drops sharply. Guo Sen feels that he can't delay any longer. He must prepare for the next move immediately. The preliminary plan he made before was to establish the orbit behind the mother star, where the temperature may be more suitable. With the suitable temperature and the appropriate orbital inclination, Guo will soon be able to have 4 seasons on his planet. Guo became excited. He carefully observed the starfield behind the mother star. There is the most suitable paradise for life. However, Guo unexpectedly discovered that there was a small orange planet there, which was constantly revolving and rotating around the star. He was instantly stunned. It's just shit. What did I work so hard for? To live in the same room with a tangerine smelling guy like you? This is fucking a husky. Guo wanted to rush over and knock that guy away. Unfortunately, if he did that, he would be in pieces, not to mention those little lives. What if he went to the near heavenly orbit? Guo soon saw another black planet. The guy's rotation speed was simply extremely high. At the same time, Guo also noticed that there was a layer of smoke-like thing on the surface of this thing, like rock powder on it. He immediately understood that the huge gravity of the star dragged this unfortunate planet and continuously peeled off its surface rocks. It is estimated that in the future, this guy will completely turn into powder. Guo looked at the star ring that had become very far away and extremely spectacular. I'm afraid that this is the end of this black planet. The temperature of the sphere has almost pushed the glaciers back to the vicinity of the North and South poles. If no decision is made, I'm afraid it will be too late to cry by then. Guo looked at the tangerine smelling planet again and sighed in his heart. Anyway, I can't squeeze it out, so I have to be neighbors with this guy. Guo moved to the outer side of the mother planet's gravitational layer, which was getting thinner and thinner. After a while, he finally couldn't feel the strange force anymore, and he untied the green gas planet, and the distance to the orange planet was not that far. Haha, The moment Guo completed the feat, he was about to praise himself, but he suddenly felt a force that was countless times greater than the mother planet, pulling him tightly. Chapter 14 With a critical eye. The red star shone with an extremely hot brilliance. Under its extremely powerful gravity, even a huge guy like a green gas planet became a citizen ruled by it. While Guo got rid of the gravity of the mother star, he was also successfully captured by the gravity of the star. Fuck, brother, you are too strong. Guo couldn't even resist a little bit, and could only be forced to start the revolution around the star. Although he has become a planet, Guo is not happy at all at this time. Before, in the embrace of the mother star, at least he could move around using clever rules, but now his telekinesis and the gravity of the star are like an ant trying to shake a tree, so he can only be a little brother. Okay, boss, congratulations on receiving me, who has become your little brother from your little brother. You can be proud of it. Guo thought so, still a little bitter. Surrounding the star, feeling its light and heat, Guo experienced the treatment of being a lucky planet for the first time, not being tidally locked. Looking at his former home planet in the distance, Guo felt like he was in a dream. He was a second-class citizen before, but now he is on equal footing with his former boss. This is just like a dream. However, this is also the result of his continuous efforts. Otherwise, any other satellite would not be able to do such a thing. Guo encircled the star again and again. He found that the orbit of this revolution seemed to be the same as before, in the shape of an ellipse, and he could adjust the frequency and speed of the sphere's rotation from time to time, and even adjust the angle of the light shining on him. Guo suddenly thought of the Earth. What is the obliquity of the ecliptic? He carefully recalled the knowledge in the geography textbook in high school, wanting to turn himself into a high-fidelity Earth. The environment of the Earth is like carefully calculated, such as the obliquity of the ecliptic, the magnetic poles, the rotation frequency, the revolution speed, etc. Even if there is a slight difference, it will immediately cause any life on it to fall into a catastrophe. Is the Earth also conscious? Guo boldly guessed, while constantly adjusting the rotation speed and revolution speed. He vaguely saw similar speculations on the internet, saying that the Earth is a giant organism, and humans are just bacteria living on it. It's terrifying to think about it. The obliquity of the ecliptic has also been adjusted to 23 degrees and 26 minutes. Before, GUOSEN would definitely sneer at this statement. But now, as a conscious planet, he has already believed this hypothesis. Didn't he control volcanoes and create atmospheres and oceans before? He even intervened in the evolution speed of single-cell life. The more GUOSEN thought about it, the more scared he became. The rotation speed has been successfully adjusted to about 24 hours. GUOSEN has been distracted by calculating the rotation time to 1 second. In order to prevent errors, he even calculated it hundreds of times. At the same time, he also adjusted the revolution speed to about 360 days, no more than 5 days before and after. Since you want to imitate it, you have to imitate it thoroughly. Everything is for the lives on the sphere. GUOSEN finally adjusted the inclination and frequency of his sphere's rotation, and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, the environment is ready. From a tidally locked satellite to a planet orbiting a star, and making various adjustments in imitation of the Earth, he can spend the remaining time to fully focus on the small lives in the spherical ocean. How long has it been since the last time he saw them? GUOSEN couldn't even remember. He has been doing various things to become a planet, and has no time to care about anything else. Well, let's see how far my little guys have evolved now. GUOSEN finally glanced at the big white dumpling that was still silently orbiting him, and completely focused his eyes on the surface of the sphere. However, before he even had time to look into the ocean, the huge changes on the land made it impossible for him to look away. I'm uneducated. GUOSEN looked at the continent covered by countless tall plants, and he could only say wow. Weren't they just small mosses a few millimeters high near the water before? When did they evolve into such a large scale and such advanced plants? GUOSEN hurriedly observed a forest of blue plants growing not far from the coast. He was surprised to find that almost every one of these plants was more than 2 meters tall, with an astonishing density. However, these guys as tall as giant trees were not woody plants. They seemed to be celery magnified hundreds of times, with branches full of water. Looking at their blue ocean-like leaves, he found that it was an illusion formed by countless thick palm-shaped leaves like water droplets dotted on the branches. Wait, I remember that after algae, there were mosses, and after that, it should be ferns? GUOSEN carefully recalled the knowledge at that time, and was full of curiosity and confusion about the plants in front of him. This looked more like the succulents he had raised when he was a human. Both the branches and leaves were very similar, but they were not so tall. GUOSEN also saw plants that looked like ordinary grass, but if you look closely, they are more like magnified versions of mosses. There was no trace of ferns. He didn't give up, and wanted to go to a location closer to the inland to see what the other plants were like, when he suddenly felt that these giant succulents seemed to move. Wind? GUOSEN looked at the leaves that were still shaking, and felt that he was making a fuss. However, as a violent commotion sounded by the water, a bunch of green translucent snake-like long strips of objects suddenly crawled onto the beach on the shore. There were thousands of them. GUOSEN was confused. What was this? Snake? Or fish? He was sure that it should be some kind of animal. After all, it was constantly moving. Soon, all these thousands of them came ashore. GUOSEN noticed that there seemed to be black arthropod-like things under these guys. He got closer and finally saw them clearly. Each of these translucent green guys had 8 pairs of symmetrical black, insect-like thin legs, and the top of the head cracked, revealing a purple mouth. The head looked around and made a vomit sound, as if looking for something. From this perspective, it really looked like a bunch of slugs. Bugs. They look too disgusting, don't they? GUOSEN was a little disgusted with the little life that evolved on his sphere. Soon, this group of giant slugs began to dig holes all over the beach. When digging holes, they are either looking for food or preparing to build a nest and then do some repair work to reproduce. GUOSEN thought so, and he saw them entering the dug holes in pairs. And soon after, there were cries from the depths of the soul. GUOSEN felt that this was really a bit hard to watch, but curiosity still made him look away. How does this creature applaud for love? I want to take a critical look. At this moment, the blue plant seemed to shake its branches again. Countless tentacles suddenly stretched out to this group of giant slugs who were having fun. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15, Beauty is Justice. Countless blue tentacles stretched out to the beach like lightning and accurately stabbed the insects in the sand hole who were having fun. Then, they rolled up their spoils and gradually retracted to their original places, those bodies that originally looked like succulents. Some of the light green insects ran fast and rushed into the water again, while more of them were silent. The originally lively beach now only had an empty sand hole and fell into a deathly silence. As a bystander, Guo Sen did not expect this to happen. He originally wanted to critically see how those insects operated, but was interrupted by this sudden attack. He looked at the succulents and found that, after catching the light green insects, they completely wrapped them with more tentacles and floated in the air. After a while, the tentacles dispersed again, and a transparent insect shell with black insect legs fell to the ground. At this time, a large group of things that looked like extremely tiny crabs rushed out again, heading straight for the insect shells, with rustling sounds. And the succulents were silent again, as if nothing had happened. Guo Sen, who witnessed the whole process, couldn't help but get closer to the succulents. He observed carefully and found that they were hiding in the darkness, almost half underground, at the bottom of the tree, with heads like centipedes, flashing countless pairs of small eyes, and looking at the direction of the beach. This group of centipede-headed monsters has a huge body with 6 giant feet, and they are huddled together motionlessly. Guo Sen never expected that these plants he thought were actually all insects, and they were carnivorous. He looked carefully at the lifelike tree trunks and leaves, and found that they were really real. They also grew directly on the backs of these centipede-headed monsters. After looking at it for a long time, it didn't look like a parasitic plant, but more like something that was completely integrated with the centipede-headed monster. No wonder those tentacles were like living things. Guo Sen couldn't help but say, wow, what's going on? Plants and insects can be on the same body at the same time. This has completely overturned Guo Sen's cognition. In his knowledge, plants like Cordyceps sinensis are weird enough, but he didn't expect that his sphere could evolve into something even weirder. Guo Sen took another look at these centipede-headed monsters and felt that it was really unacceptable. Those slug-like insects are fine, but centipede-headed monsters are even worse. Are there no normal animals and plants? Guo Sen originally wanted to be excited about the great evolution of life, but now seeing the appearance of these two disgusting guys, his interest has been reduced by more than half. Is there nothing with a higher appearance? With doubts, he began to look deep into the land. As far as the eye can see, dense plants almost dominate the entire land. Except for some rocky desert areas in the center of the land and extremely tall mountains, there are plants everywhere. But strangely, Guo Sen saw that green plants were not the main ones, and basically blue and red were more common. Under the forest, it was basically a paradise for mosses of different heights. Guo Sen searched a lot, but still did not find ferns. From time to time, various small creatures with extremely fast speeds ran through the mosses. Of course, there were also those huge and strange insects rustling by. He used his telekinesis to catch the strange insect and looked at it carefully. He found that it had green compound eyes, or 3 straw-like mouth, nearly 5 or 6 meters long, and an arthropod-like body as hard as steel. The shell was shiny, as if it had been waxed. After he put down the strange insect, he caught a few other things, and found that almost all of them were extremely ugly, and could not be looked at directly. Guo Sen felt a little horrified. How could his intervention in evolution actually produce these things? He was in no mood to look at anything else, so he turned his sight back to the blue ocean. I wonder what kind of animals and plants there are here? His sight dived into the water and soon emerged from the water. Guo Sen was a little doubtful about his visual system. He just saw something that seemed bigger than a hill swimming very close to the sea level. No way. How is it possible? In his cognition, a blue whale was good enough, but the behemoth just now was bigger than dozens of blue whales combined. Guo Sen felt that there must be something wrong with his visual system. Something that big couldn't possibly exist. With doubts, Guo Sen's sight dived into the sea again. The hill-like monster was opening its bloody mouth and swallowing the seawater along with countless creatures. Then, another powerful airflow gushed out from the back of its body, and at the same time, it also made the monster move forward by dozens of meters. Guo Sen was startled. He quickly widened his sight range and found that it was a giant fish with a shell. Its shape was almost the same as those fish on Earth, except that its body was too huge. The thick and continuous shell on its back was also spread on its back like scales. There were countless bumps on the fish's head, and there was even a transparent shell outside the eyes that seemed to have almost no pupils. As for what this thing ate, Guo Sen took a closer look. There were big beetles that looked like scorpions, insects that looked like centipedes, and insects that looked like snakes without eyes. There were insects, and insects everywhere. Guo Sen felt a chill. Was it opened in the wrong way? Why were there only insects? Why did this monster have a fish head and a fish body? He looked deeper into the part of the ocean far away from the land. More ugly fish appeared. Guo Sen originally thought that his visual system had become immune to the ugly monsters before, but after seeing these strange fish, he felt that he had to move his visual system out of the sea immediately. He felt that even the ugliest fish he had seen in the aquarium was 100 times more beautiful than these guys whose faces looked like someone had shit on them. Guo Sen suddenly felt a little sad. What was going on? Why were all the creatures on his sphere so ugly? There wasn't even a normal one. If any of them evolved into a creature with high intelligence, Guo Sen would definitely not be able to communicate with them. Just looking at their faces, he couldn't have a normal conversation. With endless regrets, Guo Sen suddenly had the idea of giving up on himself. It would be better if he had been orbiting around the green gas planet. He had wasted so much effort and risked being smashed to pieces to create a super suitable environment for them to survive, but in the end, they all looked so ugly that they couldn't be looked at directly. This was really sad. Guo Sen suddenly felt an incomparable drowsiness coming from the depths of his mind. He felt that he had to sleep for a while to alleviate this mental damage. After turning off the visual system, Guo Sen fell into a dormant state again. Chapter 16 Where is the high imitation? Time flies. When Guo Sen opened the visual system again, the first thing he saw was not the lives on the sphere, but the orange looking guy. Previously, he was blinded by the low looking guys on the sphere, and Guo Sen did not take the time to see his neighbors. As a newcomer, he really wanted to have an eye contact with this big orange. Unexpectedly, this guy came to his door as soon as he opened the visual system. After avoiding the gravity of the green gas planet and becoming a planet, Guo Sen was soon bound by the huge gravity of the star and near the scheduled orbit. He did not expect that there was such a planet that looked like an orange. Fortunately, Guo Sen was not as close to it as he imagined. From Guo Sen's point of view, this guy was even the size of a sugar orange. Orange, you occupy such a good place. Have you evolved life? After Guo Sen ran on the current orbit, he found that this was really a very suitable area for the growth and evolution of life. It was neither cold nor hot, and the temperature was suitable. He didn't know how much time had passed since he became conscious, but if the orange had been in this suitable orbit from the beginning, it would definitely have at least the lowest level of life, right? Guo Sen actually wanted to have a companion. As a lonely planet, he couldn't communicate with anything at all. He had thought before that other planets might also have consciousness, but no matter how he called, he didn't receive any response. But if there was life on the big orange in front of him, Guo Sen hoped that they could have highly developed intelligent life, so that they would send a detection satellite like Cassini to observe him carefully, like the Earth did. With infinite hope, Guo Sen infinitely magnified the observation of the visual system and chased the figure of the big orange, wanting to observe whether there was any sign of life in this thing. However, with his current ability, he could only magnify the big orange to the size of a wash basin, and it would be impossible to make it bigger. Wait, is this the atmosphere? GUOSEN noticed the misty translucent gas protective shield in the outer space of the big orange. This atmosphere seemed very thick, and the transparency was not that high. If there is an atmosphere, then there is also an ocean. GUOSEN muttered, carefully observing the layer of orange reflections on the surface of the sphere, wondering if it was an ocean or something like that. It turned out to be an orange rock that covered almost the entire globe. Only a few places had blue waters, and they are very small, and not many in number. Fuck, it occupies such a good place, but it has become like this? GUOSEN didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If life is to be born, it will be really difficult. He scanned around again, and found that the orange had 3 satellites, each of which was a standard sphere, all white, like 3 golf balls. This is obviously better than his own treatment. GUOSEN looked at his own big dumpling, that had never changed, and couldn't help but smile bitterly. Big dumpling, look at the appearance of other people's satellites, ours is just a bottle of vinegar. After looking for a while, GUOSEN finally shifted his sights, and returned to his own sphere after thinking that there was really nothing to pay attention to. He didn't know how many years he had slept before. Now, what have those ugly, no, cute little lives on the sphere evolved into? GUOSEN remembered their appearance again at this time, and his enthusiasm was instantly gone. However, he still had to take a look. After all, they were his children. GUOSEN narrowed his visual system, and looked at the land with infinite forests in his impression. Huh, what's going on? Starting from the center of the only piece of land on his sphere, almost to a distance not far from the coastline, it was almost an endless desert Gobi area. The forest that originally covered the entire land now only has an extremely small proportion left, and closer to the desert is a vast and sparse grassland. GUOSEN observed carefully, and found that even the precipitation on land is relatively less, and more of it is on the ocean. He thought about it, and understood it instantly. The area of this entire piece of land is really too large. In addition, after becoming a planet, he had 4 seasons, cold, temperate and tropical zones, and also created a desert climate in the deepest part of the inland. The less forest vegetation, the smaller the area suitable for terrestrial life to live, the smaller the entire population of life, and the more single the species. It was difficult to survive, let alone evolve. GUOSEN looked at the north and south poles again. During the time he was sleeping, the glaciers had been developing rapidly, and now they had completely covered most of the land and oceans in the cold and subcold zones, and the temperature on the entire sphere was constantly decreasing. Even the ice and snow on the mountains were thicker. It seemed that this environment was too harsh for life. GUOSEN knew that he really couldn't turn off the visual system casually, unless it was urgently needed in the future. Otherwise the dormant time could even be so long that the life circle he had worked so hard to create on the sphere would completely disappear. Laziness destroys people. He decided to always observe any changes on the sphere in the future, and make adjustments to prevent such things from happening again. After learning from his mistakes, GUOSEN blamed himself for a long time, and decided to start a major transformation of the entire planet. The first thing to do is to heat up the sphere that is about to enter the ice age again. He has done this once before, and now he is quite familiar with it. The method: volcano brothers, start erupting. Hundreds of volcanoes located near the cold zone began to erupt violently. The extremely hot magma quickly heated up the temperature in the land and the ocean, and the melting speed of the glaciers began to accelerate rapidly. After doing this, GUOSEN looked at this vast land. He always had a feeling that the area of his sphere seemed to be much larger than that of the Earth. Now looking at this land, he felt that it was really huge. The Earth has 7 continents and 4 oceans. How about a high imitation? GUOSEN thought about it, and shook his head again. There was no need. It would be a bit boring to imitate everything. Why not? GUOSEN first used the crustal activity to crack the entire land into countless cracks, controlling those volcanoes from erupting violently. Then, he isolated the largest desert part, and divided the whole land into 9 almost equal parts with it as a center, and arranged them in the frigid zone, temperate zone and tropical zone. He also moved the land, except the largest desert area in the center to all directions, and separated a fairly wide ocean, forming 9 independent lands. Between the lands, Guo Sen left a very wide ocean, and destroyed some of the marginal areas of the land, making countless peninsulas and a considerable number of islands. Then, he made plateaus, hills, plains and depressions in the large lands. He changed the flow of the river, and made countless lakes. After Guo Sen made these rough modifications, he was relieved. In this way, there should not be such a vast desert, nor will the situation, where forests are almost only distributed on the edge of the water sources before. The next step is to make more subtle operations. Chapter 17 What have I missed? Guo Sen had a complicated idea. He did not immediately start to carefully organize all the topography and landforms on the surface of the sphere, but chose to investigate the existence of all the life forms on the planet. When Guo Sen moved the plates, and roughly made various terrains, he did not consider whether those small lives could survive. In his opinion, if the environment as a whole is not good, those who are alive are probably just struggling to survive. What's more, when he moved the plates to divide the land and the sea, he was very careful not to crack and divide the forest area, and also suppressed the eruption of volcanoes. In addition, Guo Sen tried his best to slow down the speed to the minimum. Basically there would not be much harm to the creatures living in the original habitat. As for how they will survive in the new environment, and how to adapt, Guo Sen can't take care of so much. He feels that in many aspects, he only needs to do a good job of the overall environment. Guo Sen turned his sight to the sparse forests on the edge that he had noticed before. The water and resources there are relatively abundant, and the creatures should grow gradually in such a place, right? His sight narrowed further. Guo Sen was surprised. These are real trees, really that kind of woody plants. Most of them were plants with fairly broad leaves, and there were also plants with needle-shaped leaves like pine and cypress. He couldn't help but think, wow, how could such a large part of the evolutionary process be omitted? Where were the ferns? Where were the gymnosperms? Why did they just go straight to the angiosperms? As for the fact that those plants were in a mess of colors like blue, purple, or red, Guo Sen was even a little powerless to complain. What was going on? He looked at the sparse grassland again. It was no longer a paradise for mosses alone. Instead, there were many short, strange-looking shrubs, and even some silk-like vines. Guo Sen had actually seen some ferns, which proved that these things had also appeared on his planet. Since there are ferns. Wow, wait, does that prove that the age of dinosaurs also existed? Guo Sen suddenly felt like crying. Similar to the handsome and terrifying dinosaurs in the magnificent Jurassic and Cretaceous periods on Earth, Guo Sen didn't even have time to take a look at them before they completely disappeared from the sphere. What kind of magical process is this? What did I work so hard for? I also want to see what dinosaurs look like. I don't want to fantasize about the big skeletons in the museum. Guo Sen was furious. He began to look for the skeletons of those huge creatures in the strata. As a result, he really found some. Although they were even bigger than those on Earth, they were also terrifying when looking at the skulls. Some even had 3 or 4 eye sockets. Guo Sen looked at these and knew that these guys really existed on his sphere, which made him even angrier. He was angry for a long time. After orbiting the star for dozens of times, Guo Sen finally calmed down and began to think carefully about why this happened. The environment changed drastically. There is only one possibility. When Guo Sen was orbiting the green gas planet before, everything evolved into the extreme environment where dinosaurs thrived. Later, until he just became a planet, everything was still normal. But after adjusting various factors such as the obliquity of the ecliptic, the direction of rotation, the orbit of revolution, and the temperature, the overall environment was completely destroyed. Dinosaurs. It is estimated that during the period of hibernation, they briefly became the dominant species on the planet, and then quickly went downhill, until they became completely extinct. The ferns that have become so rare also fully illustrate this point. What he thought was a tricky operation at the beginning, directly copying the state of the Earth when he was still a human, led to the current situation. Copying is really bad. Guo Sen regretted it. I want Jing Jing. Don't ask me who Jing Jing is. He dived into the seawater, hoping to ease his mood by doing so. As a result, he seemed to encounter something familiar. A giant fish. The giant fish, like a hill with a shell dozens of meters thick, was just like the last time he saw it, with almost no changes. It was still there with its bloody mouth open, swallowing a large amount of seawater and other creatures, and then sprayed a strong stream of water from the back of its tail, instantly moving forward dozens of meters. Guo Sen was stunned. Wait, what's wrong with this guy? According to the evolutionary situation above, the changes in the sea should be earth-shaking. How come this guy has not changed at all, except that his shell is thicker and his body is bigger? Could it be that other creatures in the sea are the same? Guo Sen moved away from this guy and began to look around. What he saw next was enough to surprise him. Fuck, dinosaur? Really a dinosaur? A plesiosaur? Several monsters with long snake-like necks and lizard-like heads swam past him quickly, as if they were avoiding something. Guo Sen immediately controlled one of them and held it in front of him for a closer look. This thing is aqua blue all over, and its head really looks like a lizard, with a snake-like neck. The overall length is only less than 5 meters, the limbs are short and thick, and the claws at the tip have evolved into a thin membrane connected together. There is something similar to a turtle shell on the back and abdomen, like a dinosaur put into a turtle shell. This thing doesn't look like a dinosaur. It looks more like an enhanced version of a turtle. I'll call you a turtle dragon from now on. He couldn't help but laugh and cry. However, just when Guo Sen wanted to continue observing it, a turbulent current suddenly passed by, and countless things shining with red light instantly surrounded the unlucky guy he caught. The blood mist filled the seawater and gradually rose. Guo Sen reacted and hurriedly wanted to continue to control the turtle dragon, but found that he could not do it at all. A sense of foreboding came over him, and Guo Sen hurriedly controlled the group of red things surrounding the turtle dragon. At the same time, the remains of the turtle dragon, which was basically only an empty shell, slowly fell from the water to the seabed. And the group of red creatures he caught, after being controlled and stopped moving, also showed their true appearance. This is a group of ugly small fish that are almost red, each of which has extremely terrifying serrated teeth, and the developed upper and lower jaws are enough to bite off hard bones. Guo Sen instantly thought of the piranhas on Earth. But those guys are river fish, and their combat effectiveness is definitely not comparable to this group of terrifying creatures like mad wolves. If the extremely fast turtle dragon just now lived on Earth, it would definitely not be the kind of chicken that would be eaten by piranhas. As Guo Sen sighed, a group of huge monsters that had been attracted by the smell of blood gradually approached here. They had a single horn and a sharp upper jaw like a spear, and they aimed their sights at the red little demons that suddenly stopped for some reason. Chapter 18 Too real to cause discomfort. While Guo Sen was still thinking about why there were fish and dinosaur-like creatures in the ocean at the same time, some sneak attackers came around. After smelling the blood, the sunlight could not penetrate their huge bodies, and the large shadow cast even completely covered the red fish. Almost in an instant, like a hungry tiger that had been hungry for a long time, these large fish with a single horn instantly tore the formation formed by the redfish school completely apart. Guo Sen reacted and quickly expanded his vision, observing this horrible sharing of food from a distance. The seawater surged wildly, even rolling up the fine sand on the seabed, and the color of the seawater even became turbid. At this moment, the giant worm that was originally hidden on the seabed for dozens of meters suddenly stretched out its bloody mouth and swallowed the two large fish that had dived into the seabed to grab food. This sudden sound situation even surprised Guo Senator. The black giant worm had just dived into the sea sand after swallowing the two large fish, and dozens of yellow-white flatfish flew out of the sand again, and the giant worm was thrown into the seawater together. They gnawed the giant worm's steel-like limbs frantically, and some drilled into its abdomen and gnawed the fragile parts there. The seawater became more and more turbid and completely chaotic. However, just like the final boss, the rock giant fish quietly came nearby by constantly spraying water. Then, a huge stream of water instantly swallowed the struggling giant worm, the unicorn fish that were fighting for food, and the yellow-white flatfish into the water. GUOSEN could see that the upper and lower jaws of the giant fish were constantly chewing, and countless blood foams rose from there and floated in the seawater. After a while, the giant fish stopped chewing, and a strong stream of water sprayed out from its back again, and countless residues instantly polluted the ocean. The residue fell on the sea sand, and countless small arthropods that had not appeared before, as well as smaller fish, appeared one after another, sharing the excrement. GUOSEN quietly raised his sight above the horizon. In front of him, the cruelty and cycle of nature were once again staged. However, the cause of this incident was that he rashly controlled a turtle dragon. The giant rockfish seemed to have been the ruler of the coastal waters and the top of the food chain since ancient times. He decided to turn his attention back to the deeper ocean. He had not explored there yet. A huge iceberg floated over from a distance. Nearly 90% of its volume was submerged in the water, and only a small part of it was above the water, standing upright like the peak of a mountain. GUOSEN accidentally discovered that the turtle dragons he had seen before were swimming in groups in the underwater part of the iceberg, as if this was their territory. He observed carefully and found that there were a considerable number of caves in the underwater part of the iceberg, which seemed to be the nests made by this group of blue dinosaurs. GUOSEN saw that countless turtle dragons came in and out of there, and from time to time some of them picked up a large piece of blue plants like kelp from the bottom of the nearby seabed and drilled into the cave. It seems that this turtle dragon is herbivorous and likes to live in groups. GUOSEN pulled his eyes away and shifted again. He saw even more amazing creatures. They were transparent little monsters with bodies like buckets and jars. GUOSEN thought they were plants at first, but when he got closer, he found that these guys had big and bright eyes. They were like big buckets standing up, and they were distributed on the seabed, relying on red kelp. But it seemed that these guys were not vegetarians. Although they relied on kelp, they didn't even eat a bite. Instead, they kept using the tentacles on both sides of their bodies to search for something in the sea sand. As the tentacles searched, some small fish and insects hidden in the sea sand were arched out again. The transparent bucket monster used its tentacles to stuff these high quality proteins into its mouth above. GUOSEN could even see the whole process of the struggling little fish slowly becoming a pool of nutrients in its digestive organs. After seeing all this, GUOSEN looked deeper into the deep sea. Countless strange and ugly monsters that stretched the imagination kept emerging. He was really tired of ugliness in the end. How could the single-celled organisms evolve in the sea for so long and still be so ugly? What went wrong? At present, apart from the turtle dragon, GUOSEN really didn't like many of them. He found the iceberg again. Well, you are the only ones who look good and like cold places so much. How about picking a few lucky viewers and going to the frigid zone to try it? GUOSEN wanted to know whether these guys who liked icebergs liked the colder frigid zone, so he controlled dozens of them and sent them to places close to the North and South poles. As for whether they evolved and whether they could adapt to the life there and survive, GUOSEN didn't think too much. At this time, he was more like a guy who did experiments everywhere. He had been doing this since the single-celled life. After GUOSEN's eyes wandered in the sea again, he finally looked in the direction of the land. He had never carefully looked for organisms there. The forest composed of angiosperms stretched a long distance along the coastline. They also grew on both sides of the river and lake, just like their ancestors in ancient times. GUOSEN knew that if he wanted to find creatures living on land, it would be right to start from here. He zoomed in and looked for creatures living in the boundless dense forest. Soon, he found his target. It was a group of creatures that looked like mice, but were the size of lambs. They were covered with long gray hair, their limbs were swinging, and they were running non-stop in the woods, as if they were chasing and playing. After a while, GUOSEN watched them collectively bend down again, and their claws like blades kept turning over the ground. GUOSEN leaned over to see that they seemed to be looking for some food. Soon, a creature that looked like an earthworm with a diameter of half a meter and a length of more than 10 meters suddenly emerged from the soil. It was completely different from the earthworms GUOSEN knew. This creature had eyes and even sharp teeth. It raised its head and intimidated the group of big mice. GUOSEN knew that on land, just like in the ocean, conflicts, eating and being eaten, such cruel laws of nature continue to occur. The rats seemed to have high IQ. They killed the powerful earthworm without much effort and swallowed its flesh with their sharp claws. GUOSEN slowly retreated. He remembered something. The ancestors of humans. He vaguely remembered that the ancestors of humans or mammals seemed to be like this kind of creature. If they really were, should they be accelerated to evolve? At this moment, a rustling sound came. In GUOSEN's sight, there appeared a group of lizards covered with scales holding spears tied with sharp stones and wooden shields. He was completely confused. Chapter 19 The Crooked Evolutionary Tree. In front of GUOSEN were ugly creatures that resembled humans and reptiles combined. They had heads that looked like enlarged lizards, with bifurcated blood-red tongues that occasionally emerged from mouths full of sharp teeth. Their eyes were golden like crocodiles, with black pupils, delicate turquoise scales all over their bodies, and powerful huge tails dragging behind them, supporting the ground. They looked ugly, terrifying, and strange. GUOSEN also discovered that the lizards had 5 fingers with sharp nails like blades, and a thin film like webs between their fingers. I'm afraid these guys are also good at swimming. In their hands, they were holding stone spears that were made of sharp black stones and sticks tied together as weapons, and the shields made of several pieces of wood tied with ropes in their hands surprised GUOSEN. Among them, there was a lizard man who looked more burly and strong, and seemed to be the leader of this group of guys. He wore a necklace made of feathers in front of him, and a diamond-shaped piece of wood was tied on his head. This can also be seen from the decorations on his body. If it weren't for the appearance, they were almost no different from humans. GUOSEN looked at these burly lizard men with well-developed limbs and nearly 2 meters tall, and suddenly he didn't know where to start complaining. What was wrong with his evolutionary tree? Apes and humans didn't evolve, so how come such lizard men popped out of thin air? And there was also a preliminary civilization similar to the Stone Age. What's going on? Did something go wrong when the single-cell evolution intervened at the beginning? GUOSEN kept doubting himself. He couldn't accept such a magical development for a while. After all, lizard men were really too ridiculous. He couldn't think of under what circumstances this cold-blooded animal could evolve into a human-like form. However, the lizardmen did not know that a thing that was almost equivalent to God was speechless about why they created them. Their purpose of coming here was to hunt the small beasts, the saber-toothed beasts, which had just had a full meal and had not had time to return to their nests. After killing them, they would bring them back to the tribe to replenish the almost running out of food. The leader of the tribe brought more than 10 of the best hunters in the tribe, almost all of whom were fully armed. The saber-toothed beasts were ferocious and extremely fast, but their meat was of good quality and their teeth could be used to make some tools. They were the best prey they could find now. Start attacking. As the strongest lizardman in the tribe, the leader was the first to bear the brunt of everything he did, and no one dared to disobey his orders. Following his orders, more than a dozen hunters each raised their spears and protected themselves with shields. The lizardmen who have lived in the forest for many years are very clear about the habits of saber-toothed beasts. When they are attacked by the enemy, they will choose to fight back immediately. Sure enough, the saber-toothed beasts who discovered the lizardman hunter group rushed towards the lizardmen who had already formed a queue like crazy. Hold on. At the leader's command, the hunters almost simultaneously shrank their bodies behind their shields, creating a solid wall. Boom. A violent collision sounded, and those shields were gradually deformed under the impact of the extremely powerful force from the flesh and bones. The ropes used to fix them could not withstand this force and gradually broke apart. The rope of one hunter's shield broke abruptly, and then fell apart. Bluff. The saber-toothed beasts found their breakthrough and roared loudly. They couldn't let go of this opportunity. The previously scattered saber-toothed beasts rushed into the gap in the formation frantically, and their sharp teeth and claws immediately attacked the lizardman hunter whose shield was destroyed. The well-trained lizardmen were not vegetarians either. The lizardman with a broken shield rolled on the ground to avoid the attack, and the spear in his hand instantly stabbed out and directly pierced into the mouth of the saber-toothed beast that pounced on him first. The force was so great that the tip of the spear even jumped out of the body. At the same time, his companions also covered him in the back. Kill. Kill. The leader bravely took the lead at this time, let go of the shield, and rushed to the beast group with a stone spear while roaring. Kill. The other hunters followed closely, turning defense into offense, holding the spears tightly in their hands, and rushed towards the fierce beast group. Blood and flesh splattered, screams and roars resounded on this battlefield. The battle continued, and the lizardmen with weapons and defensive shields had the upper hand. They would not fight alone, but 3 or 2 would deal with a saber-toothed beast together, and wait until the other was completely killed, before attacking the next one. From time to time, saber-toothed beasts fell to the ground, and some lizardmen were ripped open by the sharp teeth, or claws of saber-toothed beasts, and fell in a pool of blood. The fierce battle lasted for a long time. However, the final victory belonged to the lizardmen hunters. After the leader stabbed the last saber-toothed beast's throat with a spear, the battle was finally declared over. Blood mist filled the forest. The exhausted leader supported his body with a shield and checked the casualties. 2 brave hunters died here, and the others were lucky enough to have some minor injuries. The bodies of saber-toothed beasts were lying on the ground, as many as 21. The results of the hunt were almost extremely rich. The meat of these saber-toothed beasts was enough to feed the entire tribe of 100 people for a long time. However, the price was also very painful. The leader hugged the 2 sacrificed companions and shouted loudly, "Go back to the tribe." The other lizardmen stabbed their spears into the air at the same time. After a while, they began to clean up the battlefield, carrying the saber-toothed beasts on their backs, and gradually left the area, until they disappeared completely into the depths of the forest. Guo Sen witnessed the entire process of this battle. He had never thought that the lizardmen actually had something like language and could communicate with each other. He had never thought that these lizardmen could organize effective formations, use practical tactics, and hunt with wisdom. He had never thought that they could use tools to hunt wild beasts at the lowest cost. Guo Sen couldn't help but ponder how many tens of thousands of years had passed in his previous sleep. How many things had he missed? The dinosaurs on land became extinct and were replaced by this humanoid creature that looked like a lizard. Could it be that the final direction of the dinosaurs' evolution was to develop towards miniaturization and eventually evolve to walk upright like humans and form civilization? Guo Sen was a little confused. What was going on? Why was the evolutionary tree of the life on his sphere getting more and more crooked? He felt uneasy just thinking that he would be dealing with these lizardmen covered with scales in the future. The more Guo Sen thought about it, the more annoyed he became. However, he was still curious about what kind of group the lizardmen had created. If these guys had such high intelligence, could they have a rudimentary civilization? Chapter 20 The Beginning of Civilization. Guo Sen was full of doubts. Will the intelligent race, the lizardmen, have an advanced civilization? Judging from the weapons in their hands and various manifestations, they should be in the Stone Age civilization now. However, have they really reached this level? With doubts, Guo Sen followed the route of the lizardmen back and kept moving his sight forward. It didn't take long for Guo Sen's sight to catch up with their team. The speed of the lizardmen didn't seem to be as fast as imagined. Guo Sen was also surprised by this. Obviously, they showed too much explosive power in the battle, so the rough stone spear could be easily pulled out of the wound of the beast. But he imagined that the big lizards on the earth were also lazy, and they were not as fast as turtles on land, so he was not so entangled. Guo Sen's sight followed their speed, and the tallest leader carried the body of his companion and led the way in front. His speed also determined the movement speed of the entire team. Guo Sen moved his sight forward for a while, but still didn't see anything. It seemed that the settlement was still far away. Guo Sen couldn't help but look at these lizardmen again. After a survey, his sight finally fell on the leader. This lizardman was nearly 2 meters tall. You can see that those muscles full of lines and extremely developed were covered by a layer of densely packed scaly skin. Except for the heart and abdomen which were white, their skin was almost all dark green. Guo Sen looked at them for a while and felt that each of them had a super body that only bodybuilding champions had. If they were placed on Earth, they would definitely make those gym guys pale in comparison. Especially the leader, who was the strongest and tallest among them. No wonder he could become the leader. Guo Sen was also a little surprised. He hadn't noticed before that these lizardmen even wore clothes made of ropes made of some unknown grass. At this time, they were tied around their waists, but they were really pitifully short. The leader's rope clothes were the worst among them. The rope clothes were dyed red. Could it be that these lizardmen have already acquired a basic sense of shame? Or are these clothes made of ropes just decorations? Or are they symbols of class? Guo Sen became more and more interested in these guys. He couldn't wait to see what their civilization had developed into. The lizardmen seemed to be very familiar with the way back without any pause. Guo Sen observed that it seemed to have been stepped on, which was probably the road they opened up for hunting. And along the way, Guo Sen also found that there were other beasts coming to attack. At most, there were some strange looking insects passing by nearby, but they seemed to have no interest in them at all, and hurried into the depths of the forest. Guo Sen no longer had any interest in seeing how disgusting the insects looked. His curiosity was now focused on this group of lizardmen. The appearance of intelligent creatures made him very excited. After walking for a while, after hearing the high-pitched voice of the lizardman leader, Guo Sen aimed his sight into the distance. A settlement surrounded by sharpened giant woods and a pile of rocks at the edge of the forest appeared in front. This is a tribe built among rocks of varying sizes. There is a sound of a large amount of water flowing nearby. The uneven wooden stakes sharpened by sharp weapons are randomly placed in the gaps between the boulders and tied together with thick ropes made of something that is almost about to break. The whole thing looks a bit messy. The lizardman team is carrying prey and moving towards one of the gaps. Guo Sen saw that there is a very small gap there, which can only allow 2 lizardmen to pass through at the same time. 2 guards holding long spears are standing upright next to it. Guo Sen understood that it is the gate and sentry post of their tribe. He raised his eyes and entered the bird's eye view mode. He found that this tribe occupies a very wide area, almost covering a large area nearby. Even the wooden fence has 2 layers, which must be tens of thousands of square meters. A fast-flowing river runs through the entire tribe, and the turbulent river water rushes to the far end. Guo Sen saw that there were hundreds of lizardmen of all sizes moving around near the river, doing all kinds of things. He also saw some strange buildings. It was an extremely simple habitat made of huge leaves and some weeds between 2 boulders, and it didn't even have a door. He felt that it was not even a house. After all, it could only block the light rain at best. If the wind blew, it would probably be completely exposed to the open air. There were nearly 40 or 50 such houses in the entire tribe. After the lizardmen hunters who returned with a full load entered the second level fence, the lizardmen who were by the river also heard the movement and immediately surrounded them. They joined the hunters and walked towards the center of the entire tribe. Guo Sen saw that there was a relatively flat circular open space, about 200 or 300 square meters. The lizardman leader walked to the center of the open space first and placed the bodies of his 2 companions in the center. He waved his fist and roared loudly, and all the lizardmen gathered around him, waving their fists and shouting hissing. Then, they moved to the river, washed the wounds of the dead lizardmen with river water, and peeled off the rope braids on them. Guo Sen was very puzzled. What exactly did these lizardmen want to do? Was this a funeral ceremony? He guessed right. The bodies of the 2 lizardmen were placed on the flat stones by the river. Some people in the crowd held some unknown wild fruits and black things that looked like dried meat and placed them next to the bodies. Then, the leader grabbed the spear and raised it to the sky. Hiss, hiss. The lizards turned their fists into fists and pointed them to the sky. Hiss, hiss. Guo Sen understood this was a memorial service to commemorate the heroic companions who died. These 2 warriors died in search of the most important source of food. They used their deaths to exchange for precious food. Guo Sen continued to look down. The leader held a corpse and walked to the river, then slowly put him into the water. The second corpse was treated in the same way. The corpses soon disappeared into the waves along with the rushing river. All the lizardmen stood on the riverbank and were silent for a while. They have their own funeral ceremony. It seems that civilization has already taken shape. Guo Sen thought thoughtfully. Chapter 21 Body Language. Soon, after the lizardmen finished the funeral ceremony, they collectively moved from the river to the square. The hunters placed their shields and spears in a corner of the square and put all the prey on the open space next to the center. After the leader checked the prey, he just waved his hand gently, and dozens of lizardmen with short stature and little muscles came out of the crowd, holding sharp stone pieces in their hands, squatting near the prey, and starting to work. Guo Sen noticed that they were all in groups of 3, and each person had a clear division of labor. One was responsible for dissection, pulling the beast's internal organs out of the abdominal cavity, and the other 2 were assisting. After the internal organs were simply pulled out, they began to separate the skin and meat, and the speed was quite fast. However, seeing the finished product with almost no fur separated, Guo Sen couldn't help shaking his head. These lizardmen seemed a little clumsy and couldn't peel off the whole piece of skin completely, but this might also have something to do with the very poor tools. Their work was soon finished. 21 furs were peeled off, and several people in the team took away the furs and threw them directly into the corner. As for the meat, they were placed on some large leaves to prevent it from getting on the dust on the ground. The leader then clapped his hands, and the workers began to cut the meat again. The stone short blades flew up and down, and the bones were gradually separated. Finally, the uneven pieces of meat were cut and put together, and the internal organs were piled together. Next, is it time to start distributing it? Sure enough, as Guo Sen expected, seeing that they had finished the decomposition, the leader immediately ordered to start distributing it, and the dozen hunters also stood up. The leader had the most, followed by the hunters, and the rest of the scraps of meat were distributed to the workers who processed the meat. The other internal organs and bones were divided up by the remaining people. In the end, there were 2 large pieces left, each of which was much larger than the leader's. 2 short lizardmen in the team came out and dragged it away. During this process, the lizardmen were very calm, and each of them seemed to have no complaints about this distribution method. Distribution according to work. Guo Sen also understood that this was the most primitive and fair distribution method. The 2 largest pieces of meat should be the family members of the dead lizardman. Guo Sen suddenly felt that these guys who did not look like humans suddenly had some human touch. The leader took the stone blade and cut the pile of meat in front of him. The other people in the tribe came over one by one, took a large piece of meat from him, and returned to their original positions. After confirming that everyone had distributed the prey, he raised his arm again. Everyone squatted down. Guo Sen understood that these guys were going to eat. However, he always felt that something was missing. Lizardman leader, hiss. Everyone, hiss. Then, they opened their bloody mouths and bit the meat. Blood and flesh splattered, and the whole square instantly entered a wild style. Guo Sen couldn't bear to watch it. Damn it, do you guys eat raw food? There is no fire, no fire! Exclamation mark. He finally understood what was missing. Guo Sen inspected the entire tribe again. There was not even a piece of firewood. Prometheus is fire. These guys didn't seem to get it. Fire is a booster of civilization. With fire, you can eat cooked food. With fire, you can make utensils. With fire, you can smelt metals. This crucial thing, the lizards don't have it at all. Before, when I saw that they were quite intelligent and had such a sense of shame, distribution rules and funeral ceremonies, Guo Sen thought that these guys already had a certain foundation of civilization. Now that I see it, they don't have it at all. They are still in the era of eating raw meat and drinking blood. Guo Sen was speechless. This is too backward, so backward. If civilization continues to stagnate at this time, when will it end? A plague is enough to kill all of these stinky lizards. He wanted to do something for these guys. After all, this is the only intelligent creature he has seen so far. Well, no matter how ugly it is still your child. Your planet is here to bring you warmth. Guo Sen made up his mind. First, he had to create a source of fire. With fire, there was a foundation for everything. Guo Sen turned his sight to the lizardman leader who had finished eating and decided to use the ability that he had not used for a long time. It's you, boy. Guo Sen stared at the lizardman leader, ready to play a third-person role-playing game. However, just as he was about to control the lizardman, a strange phenomenon occurred. He found that his sight was not looking down at the head of the leader, but directly turned into a first-person perspective. Why did it become a first-person perspective? The palms covered with heart scales swayed in front of his eyes, clenching and stretching according to Guo Sen's consciousness, as if they were completely his own hands. Move your legs, and take a few steps. The footsteps are light, and the breeze blows in your ears. Guo Sen can feel it through vision, smell, and hearing. There is also the strong beating heart and the long lost breath. Hey, he is high. My ability is so amazing that I can actually take over the body of a lizard man. Guo Sen jumped for a while and then danced his fingers to play the guitar and was so happy. He completely forgot that he had occupied the body of the tribal leader. Of course, he also forgot that the leader was in front of a large group of lizard men. What's wrong with the leader? I don't know. Maybe he's too happy. Maybe he's too sad. After all, Guo Sen suddenly heard these words. He was stunned for a moment, looked at the lizard men, and realized that he could actually understand the ugly hissing sound before. Ah, cough cough. Guo Sen immediately became serious. He knew that he had to play the role of a lizard man leader perfectly now, at least in front of these little brothers. The lizard men were silent for a moment, and Guo Sen realized that these guys seemed to admire this leader very much. He looked around and kept calm. My subordinates, you can sit down. When Guo Sen said this, he thought he would hear a hissing sound, but he didn't expect that it was a sound he could understand. The subordinates were very obedient, and everyone sat down sparsely. On the square, only the tall leader Guo Sen stood. My subordinates, we seem to have to make some changes. Guo Sen felt that he had to slowly guide these guys to accept something like fire. Forcing them to accept it would only have the opposite effect. Yes, leader. The lizardmen shouted in unison. Guo Sen opened his arms and pressed his palms down, signaling them to be quiet, but the subordinates seemed to have no idea of the poem and started a small commotion. What is the leader doing? I don't know. Is he injured? Maybe the battle was too intense today, and his head. Guo Sen was speechless. He forgot that these guys were very backward and definitely didn't know what body language was. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22 Fire. Shut up. Guo Sen also put himself in his shoes to prevent the leader from being diagnosed as mentally ill. Everyone fell silent instantly. Under the pressure of the leader, no one dared to argue anymore. Listen to me. The change I've just mentioned is not something I want you to discuss with me, but something you have to accept. Guo Sen took a deep breath. He hadn't breathed so hard for a long time. If our tribe wants to become stronger, we must make changes. If you have any objections, come out and fight me now. Guo Sen knew that in such a primitive tribe, whoever is the best is the boss. As the leader of the tribe, you rely on strength. Of course, wisdom is also very important. Everyone was silent. Very good. Guo Sen was satisfied. If anyone dared to stand up, he would definitely control the unlucky guy to turn him into a puppet and kill him with the leader's spear. Progress often comes with necessary sacrifices. This is also a necessary awareness if civilization wants to move forward. Guo Sen is not indecisive, and he doesn't think this is cruel. I'm not even a human being anymore. It is really stupid to always look at things from the other side's perspective. In order to improve the civilization of these humanoid creatures, Guo Sen will not reject bloodshed and death. He is the master of this planet. Fortunately, these lizards usually listen to their leader and sit obediently at this time, saving themselves trouble. Today, we lost 2 more warriors. Their deaths made me realize one thing: our weapons, and even ourselves, are extremely backward. If our bodies could be stronger, our weapons could be sharper, and if our shields could be more solid, how could we let 2 warriors die in battle and then be swallowed by the water? The warriors paid with their lives in exchange for precious food, but they can never eat it again. new life will be born, and new warriors will be trained. But if our weapons are still as backward as before, and our bodies are still like now, you will see the death of your companions, the death of your friends, and your own death. Look at this. This seemingly strong body can't even fight against wild beasts alone. Look at this tattered shield. I know you made it with great effort to protect us from being killed by wild beasts, but can they really protect us? Look at this almost broken spear. How many stones did it take to knock it into its current shape? But it can hardly pierce the fur of the wild beast. With only our current bodies and weapons, what have we gained? The bodies of 2 warriors. Is this what we want? Is this what you want? Guo Sen roared at the lizards, and he raised his arms from time to time, waving the spear at hand. No. The lizards shouted in unison. Chief. A lizard man with wrinkled skin and slow movement stood out from the crowd. Guo Sen looked at him. The one who chose to come out as a representative at this time should be the most respected old lizard man in the tribe. His words should also represent the voice of the entire group. Speak. Guo Sen waved his hand. Chief, you also know very well that the 2 sons who were killed today are my 2 sons. How can I not be in pain? I also hope that we can have stronger power. Every time you come to hunt, you will not bring anyone's body. Guo Sen nodded and decided to let the old man continue. Chief, if we can become stronger, we will not be attacked by other tribes, and we will not have to put the bodies of our relatives into the water every time. But how can we become stronger? Can we become stronger? The old man's voice trembled, and he crawled on the ground. Of course there is a way, otherwise, I would not say such a thing here. Guo Sen was happy in his heart. Since you also want it, it will be easy. However, there are other tribes. It seems that I really didn't look carefully before, and I thought there was only this small tribe. The old man raised his head tremblingly, and looked at Guo Senator. Chief, then please tell us what to do. This is what Guo Sen was waiting for. Let me show you a miracle. Guo Sen knew that, in order to fool these primitive people, he had to come up with something that looked like the supernatural. This was easy for him. If you want fire, then bring fire. Where does it come from? Volcanic eruption. Guo Sen's consciousness moved, and a huge explosion suddenly sounded on the seashore not far away from here. A fireball shining with red light soared into the sky and flew straight towards the tribe of the lizardmen. All the lizardmen stared at the red object that suddenly appeared in the air, and they were so scared that they could not move. Controlling the solidified magma, Guo Sen lightly threw it 2 meters in front of the old man. Got. The old lizardman took 2 steps back and knelt on the ground again, causing all the lizards to crawl on the ground at the same time. Guo Sen was very happy in his heart. This time you really called the right thing. The old lizardman slowly raised his head. He looked up at the leader, who had never been so mighty and magical, and he was deeply subdued from the bottom of his heart. Whether it was the previous speech or the thing that just appeared like a miracle and fell from the sky, it was extremely shocking to everyone. Chief, what is this? Guo Sen looked at the magma block that was constantly steaming and crackling under his fingers and nodded. Find me some hay and branches. He gave an order. Immediately, a little lizardman came running over with a bunch of things in his arms and looked at him with great admiration. Guo Sen felt an inexplicable pleasure. If you guys knew that I was more than just a leader, would you worship me to the point of going crazy? Set up a tablet, make a statue, and worship it every day. He couldn't help but feel happy in his heart. However, he did not forget the important things. Subordinates, I received the oracle of God. He told me that if I want the tribe to become stronger, I must borrow this kind of thing. Guo Sen picked up a stick, picked up a bunch of hay, and put it on the magma. Thick white smoke rose, and then the haystack instantly turned black, and a ball of jumping flames gradually rose. The lizardmen were so scared by this sudden change that they collapsed on the ground. Guo Sen expected this kind of thing and continued to put branches on it. Soon, the front end of the thick branch quickly carbonized and ignited flames. Guo Sen held it high. The source of our strength lies in fire. Thanks to ZUIJIU King Khan for the 2000 coin reward. Thanks to Black Pepper Beefsteak, Fat House Happy Things, Dong Nanning, and Time Travel Administrator Aylin for the 100 coin reward. Thank you all. I will work harder to code this book. Chapter 23, The Light of Civilization. Fire. The frightened lizardmen looked at the leader, not understanding what he was talking about. But their eyes were fixed on the unknown red thing that was jumping. Fire. Could it be this? Guo Sen picked up a piece of uneaten meat beside him, skewered it on a thinner branch, and began to smoke it on the branch that had quickly carbonized. The fragrance was everywhere. The roasted meat oil kept dripping on the charcoal, making a hissing sound. This is. The old lizardman smelled the smell up close, and suddenly felt his appetite again, and his saliva flowed out. He had just eaten the raw meat. Try to eat it? Guo Sen tore the half-cooked meat in half, and handed half to the old lizardman. Hey? The old lizardman held the piece of meat with both hands, staring at it with triangular eyes, not daring to eat it. Guo Sen knew that it would not be so easy for them to accept it easily. It would not work if he forced it. He threw the remaining half of the meat into his mouth. Damn, why is it so fishy? There is no taste at all. It is completely different from what I imagined. However, for the sake of the plan, he immediately pretended to be very delicious and laughed to cover up. Seeing this, the old lizard man also trembled and tore off a piece of meat and stuffed it into his mouth. Whoa, what on earth is this? Guo Sen could hear that the other party seemed confused by the taste. Is it delicious? In fact, he was not sure, but the other party seemed to like it very much. Chief, what on earth is this? Don't ask, you guys come and try it too. Guo Sen patiently promoted it to the hunters. The hunters came forward and ate the cooked meat, and at the same time they exclaimed. Guo Sen knew that he was halfway to success. Once the cooked meat enters the mouth, it will immediately have a strong impact on their inherent raw food habits. They may resist at first, but the more they chew, the more they will savor this novel taste. In the end, the bloody fresh meat will slowly be defeated by this taste. The bacteria, viruses, and parasites in the meat also disappeared under the high temperature, which virtually eliminated the chance of disease. Of course, cooked meat is easier to digest than raw meat, and it takes less time to chew. The time saved can be used to do a lot of things. As for the half-cooked beef, sashimi, and raw seafood that have emerged on Earth, they are things that only came about after the era of advanced technology. Today's science can know the deformation temperature of protein, the inactivation temperature of microbial toxins and parasites, and use temperature to make food more delicious and healthier. However, these are things that only modern humans at the top of the planet are qualified to think about. For primitive people with poor sanitary conditions and far inferior physical functions to humans, cooked meat is what they should choose. Guo Sen wants these lizardmen to get used to eating cooked meat first. Only in this way will they have more time and better bodies to develop the tribe and make it grow continuously. But, Chief, the prey has shrunk so much after passing through this fire. It's really. The old lizardman had another question at this time, and the people around him nodded. I'm just asking you, is it delicious? Guo Sen stood in front of him and asked. It's delicious. That's it. If you want to eat more, go hunt more prey. I've decided that from now on, we can only cook meat cooked with fire. After Guo Sen said this, he looked at the crowd. There was complete silence. They probably didn't know what cooked meat meant, but Guo Sen had plenty of time to instill this term into their souls. Soon, the second batch of meat was also roasted, and Guo Sen distributed it to everyone in the tribe. Let them remember this taste, and forget the fishy smell of fresh blood and flesh. Sure enough, after a while, Guo Sen received a satisfactory response. Almost everyone was addicted to cooked meat. At the same time, if the lizards in the tribe wanted to eat these cooked meats again, they would have to work harder and hunt more beasts. The backward productivity could not meet the growing needs. Chief, if we'll eat this cooked meat as you said, we will have to hunt more prey. But there are not so many capable hunters in the tribe. The old lizardman also immediately expressed his concerns. As for this, Guo Sen's mind moved. Countless light green gravel flew out from the depths of the ground nearby and landed beside him, followed by the exclamations and cries from all the lizardmen. In their opinion, this was a completely terrifying and weird thing. as long as it is an intelligent creature. The first reaction when faced with something that cannot be explained is fear. Guo Sen also understood this, and he began to play tricks. Only in this way can he convince the ignorant primitive people. Can't. This is the sacred stone given to us by God. Guo Sen raised his hands to the sky, looked up, and did it in a very realistic way. Got, sacred stone. Everyone recovered a little, and said almost in unison. This is not a sacred stone, but malachite. Guo Sen used to be a mineral fan. After playing with it for a while, he knew what these were used for. The raw material of copper. Kanbanwa. Guo Sen was talking nonsense while using his mind. The 2-meter high pile of stones instantly turned into green powder. The people in the tribe could only shout in a loud voice, "Find me more hay and sticks." The oracle said that this is necessary for making weapons. Guo Sen immediately gave a new order. The lizardmen did not know the relationship between the sacred stone and the hay and branches. After Guo Sen's trickery, they had to believe it. While they were getting fuel, Guo Sen was not idle either. He used his hard and powerful claws to dig a nearly 20-centimeter round pit on the dry ground. He looked at the thick branches next to him and found a straight one. With a thought, he dug out the center part of it and made it into a cylinder. At this time, a considerable part of the branches on the other side of the magma block were also carbonized. "Chief, I'll give you this hay." The lizardman's subordinates put down the hay and wood and looked at Guo Sen with great admiration. "Everything is ready." Guo Sen muttered softly, put a handful of hay into the pit, added a lot of small sticks, and then ignited them with the fire from the magma. Thick smoke rose, and a small fire started. Guo Sen took the sticks that had become crispy charcoal and put them into the fire. Then, he put some malachite powder into the pit and covered it with a layer of charcoal. After the flames were covered, the white smoke gradually became thicker. The wooden pipe with the core, ripped out before, was now useful. Before Guo Sen inserted it into the pit, he sent a lizard man to get some wet mud and a large piece of thick grassy soil from the river. The wooden pipe was inserted into the pit, and Guo Sen grabbed the soil to cover it and quickly blocked all the air outlets with wet mud. He was going to blow into the wooden pipe. Unexpectedly, this step suddenly went wrong. Guo Sen forgot that the person who wanted to blow into the wooden pipe was a humanoid with a lizard head. It seemed difficult to aim the long mouth at the mouth of the wooden pipe. "Hey, come here and try." Guo Sen called a hunter and ordered him to come over immediately. "Chief, what should I do?" "Blow air." "Will it work?" "I understand." The hunter seemed to be a little frustrated. "What the hell is going on? My mouth is not shorter than yours, and I can't do anything about this either." "Okay." Guo Sen didn't care about that. He glared at the guy and he blew the wooden pipe obediently. Blowing air in must be continuous. For safety, Guo Sen called all the remaining hunters over and took turns to blow air in. The other lizardmen stared at each other, not knowing what was wrong with this leader. Blowing air into the pit. Is he crazy? Should he be overthrown? After a while, Guo Sen felt that it was about time. "Come on, get me a lot of water." The confused lizardman obediently used a basket made of rope to fetch water. Guo Sen looked at him and couldn't help laughing. It's a waste of time to fetch water with a rope basket. Can you do it? However, he still lifted the layer of grass covering it and asked the lizardman to take turns to pour water into it. The white smoke choked everyone and made them cough. Everyone gradually came to a common understanding. This leader is crazy, and if he can't do anything, he will be overthrown immediately. The smoke gradually dissipated, and Guo Sen poked out with his spear, and a piece of ochre yellow shining thing appeared in front of everyone. This is the copper he wanted. Chapter 24 Fatal Flaw. Guo Sen was also a curious young man. When he was in college, he joined a club composed of strange people who were obsessed with minerals like him. In order to prove that he could, he read some popular science articles and excitedly tried to smelt copper by the river. The process was a bit difficult, but the results were rich. After several experimental verifications, he fiddled with a lot of copper blocks and even made a copper brick to give to the goddess he loved. Of course, the other party almost beat him to death with the brick. Guo Sen later withdrew from the club because of this and hid his achievements and fame. The experiment is actually very simple. The first step is to dig a pit, light firewood, put charcoal, then put malachite powder, and then cover it with a layer of charcoal. The second step is to take out the blower and connect an iron pipe to it, and find a piece of wet grass to cover it, and then use the mud by the river to block the gap to make an air outlet. The third step is simple. Use the blower to continuously inject air into it for a few hours, and pay attention to the color of the flame. Finally, pour water into the carbon pit, pick up the copper with a wooden clip and rinse it. Good kids, please don't imitate me. This uses a redox principle. Charcoal burns to produce carbon monoxide. After covering the high temperature resistant wet grass, the wind blown inward by the blower will increase the temperature inside, forming an extremely simple furnace. Long-term air injection will produce an oxidation reduction process at high temperatures. Carbon monoxide combines with oxygen in malachite to produce carbon dioxide and metallic copper. Primitive people who don't even know fire certainly don't know this chemical reaction. Guo Sen didn't expect that it would come in handy at this time. Holding the still hot copper block with a wooden stick, Guo Sen led everyone to the river and brought some river water to wash it and cool it down. The metal shining with a fire-like color shone under the light of the stars. The lizards were all confused. Who has seen such a thing? Besides, didn't the leader just throw the green powder into the fire before? What the hell is this red thing? You guys, use the method of making the spear tip to make it into the same shape. As soon as Guo Sen gave the order, several short lizardmen came out immediately, picked up the copper block, as if holding the moon, and picked up a few black stones to make it. After a while, Chief, this is... The old lizardman saw something he had never seen before. It was clearly in the shape of a stone spear tip, but it felt sharper. The shining light was enough to blind his eyes. The spear tip was quickly tied to a stick and handed to Guo Senator. He took the new weapon and drew an arc in the lush grass by the river. In an instant, the grass broke into two pieces. Guo Sen easily scratched the freshly peeled animal skin and cut it into pieces. Guo Sen was very satisfied. The sharpness of the spear tip was really not covered. Seeing this, the lizardmen knelt down quickly. They all confirmed their rise. Whoever said to overthrow our boss, I will be the first to kill him. The blade made in this way is much stronger and sharper than the stone blade. However, Guo Sen still needs practical experience to let these simple-minded lizardmen know how good metal is. Okay, you guys do what I did before and make more of this stuff. Guo Sen gave the order, and soon, the lizardmen, led by the hunters, began to copy it. One round pit after another appeared on the flat ground of the square. While they were digging the pits, Guo Sen piled up a half-meter circle with rocks in the center of the square, and threw a large pile of dry branches and hay into it, and threw the magma in. The flames burned after a burst of thick smoke rose into the sky. Now, the bonfire as the fire was ready. Okay, come and find more branches and sticks, put them all in the fire, wait until they turn white, put more wood, remember to try to dry as much as possible, do you hear? The next step is to let these guys protect the fire source, and prevent the fire from disappearing easily. Chief, I understand. The old lizard man waved his hand, and some lizard men immediately ran away to work. Guo Sen looked at this old guy and thought to himself, you are so lazy, you only know how to order others to work. However, Guo Sen also noticed that he had been watching him do those things from the beginning. When making a bonfire, the old lizard man even went to study the malachite powder for a while. If he could summarize these skills and teach them to more lizard men, he could save himself a lot of trouble. The profession of teacher must exist from now on, and Guo Sen, who is about to become the first official teacher, thinks that this old lizard man should be qualified. Come here. Guo Sen waved at him. Chief, you saw the whole process of my making weapons just now, right? Guo Sen asked. Yes, Chief. Go and tell them how to do it. Guo Sen pointed to the hunters who had forgotten how to smelt copper. The old lizard man nodded and immediately gave the hunters instructions. Making fire, putting charcoal, putting malachite powder, putting charcoal again, making wooden barrels. The old man remembered every step very clearly. The hunters soon became familiar with this somewhat complicated process under his tireless teaching. Soon, irregular copper blocks with shining light were produced. Then, the female lizard workers who had been waiting for a long time poured water on them to cool them down, and then began to polish them with rocks. After the sunset, more than 10 copper spear tips were made. Guo Sen wanted to call the hunters to go to the forest to test the power of the copper spear, but he discovered something unexpectedly. The lizards all gathered around the campfire, and even the guards at the gate closed the gate and ran over. Guo Sen was a little puzzled at first, but until he felt the cold air constantly invading the skin inside the scales from the outside, he hurriedly sat over with his arms folded. Reptiles are cold-blooded animals. When the temperature drops, various functions also decrease, and the body temperature will gradually drop. Even the mighty ones would immediately become weaklings when they encounter the cold. Guo Sen had never thought that the lizardmen actually had such a fatal flaw. He vaguely remembered that the location of this continent was in the subtropical area at low latitudes. In this kind of weather, it would still be a little cold at night. This sudden drop in temperature also limited the activities of the lizardmen. The bonfire crackled and burned violently. The lizardmen, attracted by the temperature, snuggled up to each other and gradually closed their eyes. Guo Sen knew that he didn't even want to move, let alone go out hunting. Using his mind, he began to move this piece of land to a lower latitude area. In this way, the lizardmen in the tropics might not have to rely on the flames to keep warm when night comes. Thanks to the book Friends Wei Zhao Yuking Shan, Chan Gongshi, Durian Snail Powder, and Amo Wang's Kong for the 100 coin reward. Thank you all. This book has been written to chapter 24. You should be able to see what kind of planet I want to write about, right? Unlike the books on evolution, written by the masters, this book progresses unusually fast, evolving from single-celled organisms to lower intelligent organisms in just a few steps. If I were to imitate the detailed process and steps of evolution written by the masters, it would be meaningless. After all, my level is limited. Thank you again for your support. Chapter 25 Power. Early in the morning, Guo Sen opened his eyes and had not slept all night. He did not want to experience how a lizard man sleeps. First, he was afraid that tens of thousands of years would pass by if he fell asleep. Second, he was really afraid of the group of female lizard men next to him. After seeing the divine power of their leader, these guys came out from all over the place all night and rubbed around Guo Senator. This also forced him to cross his arms from time to time and use the excuse of going to a distance to find firewood to fill the bonfire, and he hardly dared to stay for even a minute. Although I'm playing a VR game similar to the first-person perspective, I don't want to experience everything. He doesn't want to clap for love with any female lizard man. Even though he had never experienced it as a human, he didn't want to lose his dignity as a god here. After Guo Sen saw that the star finally rose, he looked around. The lizard men, who were hunters, also got up early and gathered around him immediately. Get ready and check out the new weapons later, Guo Sen said, and went straight to the house where the weapons were stored, took out the bronze gun, and handed it to them. As for the shield, Guo Sen felt that this kind of broken wood tied with simple straw ropes did not have much defensive power. The evidence is that they were almost half broken after just one collision with the beast, and the ropes had more or less broken. However, the lizard hunters seemed to value this very much. In front of Guo Sen, they found some straw ropes and then tied the wooden shields again. Guo Sen suddenly felt that this shield should also be improved. Where are the furs of those beasts? Chief, the useless things from the saber-toothed beasts have been thrown into the corner. A hunter seemed to not understand why Guo Sen asked this question and answered casually. Guo Sen was almost fuming. Damn, such a good thing, how could it be thrown away? Fur. Wouldn't it be nice if you made them into clothes? It's very warm, isn't it? It still has a certain degree of defense. At worst, it's better to put it on than sleeping together at night for warmth, right? Bring those furs here, quickly. Guo Sen was speechless. What's wrong with these lizardmen? They have no use for the things on their prey. After a while, several hunters piled those stinky furs in front of Guo Senator. Look at what I did. Guo Sen was speechless. He immediately picked out a piece of fur and wrapped it directly on the shield. Here, that's it. However, despite saying that, he still couldn't play the straw rope well and couldn't use it to tie the shield and fur together properly. The hunters are very good at this job. They tied the fur on it without much effort. Guo Sen nodded. Okay, let's get ready to go. At this time, the other lizardmen also got up and everyone returned to their posts. Guo Sen saw that these guys were actually quite hard working, especially the old lizardman, who dragged some people over to explain how to make copper. Guo Sen was still very satisfied with this. At least they were diligent, at least they knew they wanted to become stronger. Such a race was worthy of surviving on his planet. Guo Sen had roasted some meat by the fire beforehand, and after it cooled down, he put it in the leaves at the reminder of a hunter, and tied it around his waist with a rope. This was the dry food they were going to bring. The previous hunters had hardly thought of this. If they were hungry, they would look for wild fruits on the nearby trees to eat. If there were none, they would have to hunt on an empty stomach. Guo Sen led 10 hunters out of the tribe, and along the road they had walked yesterday, they continued to explore forward in a long snake formation. This was his first time to go hunting. As a human, Guo Sen had never killed a chicken, let alone hunt. He was more excited than anyone else for this action. He did not walk and stop like the leader did yesterday, observing whether the surroundings were safe before moving forward, but walked very fast. During the march, he also used his visual system to check the surroundings. If there were any beasts, he would know it before the lizardman. Not long after, Guo Sen led the hunters to the place where they had fought with the beasts called saber-toothed beasts yesterday. Leader, it doesn't seem safe around here. The hunter at the end of the team reminded him as soon as he stopped. Guo Sen had noticed it a long time ago. The saber-toothed beasts yesterday seemed to be looking for enemies. After smelling their scent, they gradually surrounded them from all directions. After Guo Sen led the team to retreat a few meters away, several saber-toothed beasts revealed their true appearance, but they did not choose to attack immediately. Guo Sen understood very well that they were waiting for the arrival of the large army so that they could have a meat bun to kill these lizardmen. He didn't want to give this group of low-level beasts any chance. Kill. Guo Sen shouted and attacked quickly. The hunters next to him were dumbfounded. Is this the boss? Isn't the boss's tactics always defensive counterattack? Exclamation mark. How did he just pounce on it? However, they immediately followed Guo Sen and rushed out. Guo Sen felt the power of this body. Even when running, he never felt the slightest imbalance. The weapon in his hand, which should have been heavy, was like a light feather. Guo Sen felt the whistling of the wind beside his ears and rushed to the front of the group of saber-toothed beasts. His arm was almost like a reflex, dragging the bronze spear straight to a saber-toothed beast and stabbing it with all his strength. The bronze spear drew a red light. However, the saber-toothed beast actually rolled on the spot and ran away. Guo Sen's stab missed. Damn. Guo Sen was stunned. What's going on? Is it so fast? Come again. He looked at the target next to him again, and the tip of the spear swept across. The saber-toothed beast just took 2 steps back and dodged the attack. Hunters. Guo Sen. This is not right. Why can't it hit it? Guo Sen tried a few more times. Even with the strength of the lizardman and the force of the bronze spear, he couldn't touch any of the saber-toothed beasts. This is embarrassing. As a leader, he performed so poorly. Will he be overthrown when he returns? However, the hunters, wielding new weapons, had killed 3 saber-toothed beasts, while Guo Sen was poking around randomly. Chief, this weapon is really amazing. They didn't care whether Guo Sen killed the saber-toothed beasts, but were immersed in the power of Neopa's new weapon. With less than half of the force, the bronze spear easily pierced the skin and flesh of the saber-toothed beasts, and when it was pulled out, there was almost no resistance. This is a power that the stone spear can't match. Usually, it takes 2 or 3 people to besiege and kill the saber-toothed beasts, but now one person can even fight them alone and not be at a disadvantage. The hunters were extremely happy, knowing that this hunt would yield more than many previous times combined. However, just when the lizardmen including Guo Sen were distracted by their own affairs, the army of saber-toothed beasts had surrounded the 11 of them. Guo Sen looked up. Damn, with this density, I can probably get one, even if I poke around randomly, right? He smiled in his heart. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.